The borderland of Kazel is engulfed in a merciless drought. The wells are empty, cracks have cut through the scorched fields. The cattle died and fear pushed people to leave the village. The Margrave considers flight to be treason. He sends soldiers to punish the apostates. Night falls on the village and the knights take to the streets. Steel blows fall on the defenseless. The bare feet of those running raise dust. The boy falls and turns around. The knight's blade is raised above his head. Blood splashes onto the dry ground. At the head of the chaos stood the Margrave's son. The sorcerer declared divine blood in his veins. The beast knows the value of someone else's work. They are still alive only thanks to the grace of his lordship and those in whose veins flows divine blood. People fled, having lost faith and patience. He insisted that if they lived a couple of days without rain, they would immediately decide to flee. The Margrave was angry, accusing them of betrayal. The woman in tears pressed the child to her chest. She begged for mercy. The knight raised his spear coldly. The blow pierced her body. Blood drenched the dry ground. The child froze in horror. The mother fell dead at his feet. The Margrave stood in the cracked earth, bored. The knights apologized. They did not know how to cheer him up. But he knew what he wanted. After a while, nearby on a tree, the bodies of the hanged were hanging. The knights were waiting for the order. The wounded men were held down so that they would not fall and the rope would not go into his throat. This is what the Margrave wanted. Parents' support, saving their children from death. A question was heard from behind. One of the slaves is wounded. You can hang him by the waist, said the knight. Otherwise, he will die before you can entertain him. The knight pinned his head to the ground with his boot. The girl rushed forward, trying to protect him. The knight noted that he should be given a chance to hold out as long as everyone else. Sophia screamed, trying to save even. She was thrown back by a strong blow to the face. She cried but stayed close. The man was hung from a tree along with a heavy load. The girl held his legs, saving him from death. The Margrave watched, enjoying the suffering. His gaze was cold and cruel. For the Margrave, it was a magnificent sight, and he praised the peasant woman, saying that she should hold him well. Without her, her beloved's wounds will be torn apart, and he will die. A man came out of the crowd. He insisted that he not rush. It was so easy to judge the blood of divine kings. He moved confidently and calmly. It was Sir Zebek. He stopped in front of the Margrave. Their eyes met. It was his lordship's fencing master. Tension arose. Zebek did not understand why they had to go so far in punishing people. An aristocrat in whose veins flows divine blood must be as noble as she. The Margrave stood with a smug grin. His nobility would not suffer if no one talked about what was happening. He considered the reprisal a natural outcome. These fools dared to disgrace his honor only because the rain was a little late. His gaze was full of contempt for the prisoners. Sir Zebek stood opposite, tense and gloomy. There was a threat between them. The Margrave called the knight a saint recognized by the royal church, but he does not intend to defame the honor of one of the bearers of noble blood. Zebek insisted that it would not be possible to hide the truth forever. One of the knights asked if he should be dealt with, but the Margrave rejected the suggestion. He ordered a whip to be brought. The knight held out the weapon of torture. The leather of the whip flashed in his hands. The Margrave swung. The blow fell on the girls holding the men. The cracking of skin on flesh echoed in the silence. The women screamed in pain. Zebek watched, clenching his fists. The screams were interspersed with sobs. The Margrave laughed, enjoying the suffering. His eyes glowed with sadistic delight. He approached Zebek without taking his eyes off him and suggested that he smile at his teacher, because life should be enjoyed. Zebek remained among the trees, looking at the hanged men. The sun hid behind the distant mountains. The hanged men swung quietly on their ropes. Ivan, hanging with a load, looked at the girl. He asked her to run, but she held his legs. The girl clung to her lover's life. She whispered names and vows. Hope for salvation burned in her eyes. The herald had been used. She glanced at the triangular sign on the floor. The thought of help warmed her heart. Night swallowed the village. The stars shone in the cold sky. The girl lost consciousness. Someone brought water to her lips. She coughed and opened her eyes. Zebek stood in front of her. He supported her and gave her something to drink. A warm spoonful of food touched her lips. The girl lay on the ground, covered with a cloak. Zebek sat under a spreading tree. The dawn painted the sky gold. He looked at the rising sun. Zebek stood up, getting ready to leave. He had come here secretly and was in a hurry to return. The girl's fiancé was propped up with a stick. His eyes remained closed. The stick fell. Zebek tensed, but Sophia held his legs. Sophia wanted to know his name. The girl promised to ask the heralds for help. Zebek was surprised to hear this. He called them soulless destroyers of holiness. Did she really oblige them with a contract? The girl lowered her head in silence. He didn't know if they existed, but even if they did, they would come. Castle had 20 armed knights, including him. The gentleman was a descendant of blue bloods. Yaga's divine blood was fearsome. The girl spoke of the magic and power of the Herald clan. They are also sorcerers. The clan of the Slayers of Holiness killed the king with divine blood. Zebek looked at her doubtfully. He admitted that the mind weakened in such horrors. Zebek called himself a holy knight of royal blood. He did not fear death from the heralds. He dreamed of destroying them if they appeared. Zebek promised to return at night. The girl watched him leave. She looked at the triangle marking 2 days. Time passed and hope faded. It was morning. The sun had already risen high in the sky. White sheep were peacefully grazing behind the fence. A calm lake was splashing nearby. Lush daisies were growing around. Greenery reigned everywhere. Ivan handed the girl a shiny gold coin. Sophia looked at the coin with surprise. They sat together under a large tree. The man asked her if she had heard of the Gerald clan. The girl was surprised and remembered stories from her childhood. She knew that the heralds were soulless destroyers of holiness. Ivan explained that the coin was imperial, gold. It could call the Gerald clan for help. He warned of danger. The inquisitors of the royal church would punish her if she was found. Ivan kissed the girl tenderly on the cheek. The girl got angry, saying, "Oh my God!" She asked why he gave her such a dangerous thing. Ivan replied that it was just in case. If something happens, you need to draw a triangle on the ground. Put a coin in the center of the triangle. Then the heralds will come to the rescue. He hoped it wouldn't come to that. Sophia looked at the triangle, holding her beloved by the legs. She repeated about 2 days in the hope of surviving until the evening. Suddenly she fell. Her eyes remained open. A flag fluttered from the tower in the scorching sun. People poured water over themselves to cool down. Zabek stood in the crowd, covering his eyes with his hand. He thought about the heat and heaviness of the day. A voice came from behind, interrupting his thoughts. The Margrave approached him with a smile, asking about his mood. Zabek noted that taxes cannot be collected from murdered citizens. The Margrave replied that there were more and more vagabonds and thieves. Zabek suggested resettling the people to fertile lands. The Margrave refused, fearing that they would ruin the fields and run away. He believed that people could be taught agriculture, but not benefactors. The Margrave recalled the royal and church teachings. Zabek fell silent, thinking about his words. The Margrave declared that the drought was a punishment for sins and lack of mercy. Zabek replied that the doctrine could be interpreted in different ways. Some are given fertile land, others drought. Sinners are punished and benefactors are rewarded. All for the good of the people, so said the Margrave. He warned Zabek not to oppose his decree and to help. The Margrave turned and walked away, leaving Zabek thoughtful. Zabek watched him for a long time, thinking about the future. Zabek looked thoughtfully at the ruins around him. The houses were destroyed. Laundry was hanging in the street. The neighborhoods were poor. The people at the well looked exhausted and weak. It was evening. The sun was slowly disappearing behind the horizon. Zabek approached the tree and noticed a girl lying on the ground. He clutched his sword, unable to bear what was happening any longer. He thought that it was all pointless, even if the heralds appeared now. Suddenly, a masked man appeared behind him, holding a sword to Zebek's head. The man threatened to kill him if he made any sudden moves. Zebek was surprised that a swordsman with such unnoticeable techniques appeared in such a forgotten place. Zebek asked if the man was Gerald, and he confirmed it by asking who he was. Zebek replied that he was a knight of the royal church. Gerald asked just in case if Zebek was his contractor. Harold laughed at the idea. Zebek got angry. He didn't want to humiliate him with such a question. Gerald thought about it and realized that his contractor, the girl, was already dead. So he thought he got the coin for nothing. But he still asked what was going on here. Zebek offered to lay down his sword and step aside so that he could tell the truth. Gerald quickly put away his sword and stepped back. Zebek was amazed at how quickly and silently he moved, like a phantom. Gerald said that he would not make things more difficult for himself and asked if he really thought that it would be more difficult for him to attack. He admitted that Zebek, being a knight of the church, had enough courage to fight. Zabek asked if the man was a mage. Azadin replied that everyone in the Gerald clan was a mage except him. Zabek was surprised. So it wasn't magic. Gerald said that it was difficult to distinguish magic from superhuman strength. Zabek did not understand what was being discussed. He asked the man's name and rank in the Gerald clan. Azadin was silent at first. Zabek insisted, because he had already introduced himself. He was Zabek from the royal church. The herald apologized for his rudeness and gave his name, Azadin. He said that he belonged to the 108 spirits, the imperial heralds. Zabek thought that 108 spirits was the lowest rank in the clan, but Azadin's movements seemed far from ordinary. Azadin said that he was now ready to listen to Zabek's story. He asked to tell what happened here. The evening was beginning. The sun was shining on the mountaintops. They stood on the cliff, watching the city from above. Gerald noticed something important and thought about it. The contract was signed after all. An owl appeared in the sky and landed on Gerald's shoulder. The owl reported that the contractor was already dead by the time he arrived. The coin was given to Gerald for free. Zabek was surprised by the talking owl. The owl ordered him to go on a new mission without rest. Zabek tried to stop Gerald. He accused him of leaving without fulfilling the customer's will. Gerald thought and remained silent. He warned about the consequences for Mr. Zabek. Zabek drew his sword and pointed it at Gerald. He would not allow this and would stop the wicked atheist. Gerald asked about the justice of such an act. He said that it was sad for Zabek. Zabek was silent, looking into the eyes of his opponent. Gerald asked who he was angry with him or with himself for turning away from the suffering. He mentioned the constellations of the night sky and the names from the myths associated with them. Zabek did not understand why he was saying this. Gerald said that people see one thing and feel another. Gerald said that some see in the star a hero from legends, others a dim, pale luminary. He compared it to different views on the execution of those who were hanged, each with their own feelings. Zabek replied that it made no difference to him, since he couldn't help them. He looked at his sword, reflected in it. Zabek explained that as a knight of the royal church, he was obliged to protect those in whose veins flowed divine blood. Gerald thought about it and said that he didn't want to fight if Zabek felt sorry for the girl. Then Gerald cut the ropes that held Ivan. He said that Zabek's sword was not his enemy. Zabek thought about it, after which Gerald asked about the shovels. Zabek was surprised, not understanding what they were needed for. Gerald explained that he wanted to bury the hanged men so that their suffering would end. Zabek thought that Kazal preferred the dead to hang from trees, a sign of his power. He thought that burial was a challenge. The herald began to dig the earth with his hands. Zabek, clenching his fists, also joined him. They dug 2 graves. Gerald stood near them and prayed, calling upon the archangel of wisdom and mercy. Zabek was surprised that Gerald used the prayers of the Order of the Saviors. Gerald admitted that he liked their ideology. Zabek thought that Gerald was reckless and impudent, rejected his family, and believed in heresy. He believed that if he doubted his faith, his clan affiliation would lose its meaning. Zabek asked Gerald what he liked so much about the Order of the Saviors. Gerald took out his bow and warned that the one whom Zabek should honor was approaching them. Zabek turned around in horror and saw the Margrave and his knights riding towards them. The Margrave turned mockingly to Zabek, saying that if he liked the peasant girl so much, he should have told him right away. He noticed that the girl, although from the village, was attractive. Zabek thought that the Margrave had learned of his concern for the girl. There were about 20 heavily armed soldiers around them, and Zabek realized that he had no chance of winning. The Margrave turned his attention to Gerald, whom he called a freak, and asked who he was. Gerald pulled back his bow and released an arrow, which accurately hit one of the knights right in the eye. The knight screamed in pain, blood running down his face. All the knights were horrified and turned to their wounded comrade. Zabek was surprised how Gerald managed to hit the arrow so accurately right in the eye of the soldier, standing almost at the very end. Gerald was already knocking the second arrow, and it flew straight at another knight. The knights quickly raised their shields, gripping the handles tightly to protect themselves. One of the soldiers dropped his shield in panic, which cracked in half. The soldier was beside himself with rage, but the arrow still pierced the shield and hit him in the stomach. Blood gushed everywhere and he collapsed to the ground, leaving bloody stains on the ground. The other knights were terrified. Gerald's arrow had cut through even their defenses. Zabek noticed that the arrow curved in flight like a living snake. Then Gerald, addressing Zabek's question about what he liked about the Order of the Saviors, explained that he was attracted to the idea itself, that the dignity of a person is determined not by his origin, but only by his faith and actions. At this moment, he was already preparing the third arrow, just like someone who is a descendant of a divine king by blood, but tortures and kills his own people. The Margrave, overcome with anger, clenched his teeth. Azadin declared that such a man could not be called an aristocrat, drew his bow and aimed an arrow. The Margrave's outburst of rage burst into a cry. He cursed Gerald, expressing all his anger and indignation. The Margrave ordered Zebek to kill Gerald, calling him a bastard. Gerald, like a shadow against the full moon, jumped up, preparing to release the arrow. All the knights raised their heads and stared at him. He hit one of them right in the eye, hitting the target again. Then he simultaneously fired 2 arrows, which struck the other warriors with amazing accuracy, and many of them fell, wounded. One of the knights tried to pierce Gerald with a spear, shouting, "Take him!" But Gerald deftly jumped onto the spear, pushed off, and made a spectacular turn in the air, stunning his enemies. He fired 3 arrows again, wounding several knights. One of the arrows even grazed the Margrave's ear, causing him to become furious. The Margrave realized that Gerald did not want to kill immediately, but sought to incapacitate his opponents in order to undermine their strength. All the knights were wounded, and the Margrave screamed in rage, trying to find out who this ruthless shooter was. Gerald gave his name, Azadin, and added that he was from the Gerald clan. The knights in the Margrave were shocked and frightened by such a name and his reputation, soulless. The Margrave, full of rage, turned around, preparing for further combat. Azadin reached for a new arrow, but the Margrave noticed that he had no more arrows. Suddenly, Azadin punched the Margrave in the face, knocking him off his feet and throwing him to the ground. The Margrave writhed in pain and screamed about his injured eye. Knights began to approach, trying to surround him, but the herald deftly dodged the sword blow and delivered a crushing counterblow to one of the attackers right in the face. Azadin realized that he had reduced the enemy's numbers with his arrows, and despite being surrounded, he boldly called on the knights to attack. Suddenly, he drew his sword and struck the lying warrior, causing horror and indignation among the knights. Who did not understand the purpose of such a cruel act? Was castration really so necessary? An owl sat on a branch nearby, watching the battle closely. There were wounded and dead bodies lying around, and Azadin calmly walked past them, demonstrating his ruthlessness. He mocked the Margrave, calling him trash who enjoyed the suffering of others. At that moment, a golden glow appeared around the Margrave. His magic manifested, symbolizing noble blood and strength. He proudly said that these streams of magic would not be able to be defeated by his enemies. But Azadin, ignoring the warnings, swung his sword again and dealt a powerful blow. The Margrave screamed in pain and horror, clutching his groin. Azadin grabbed him roughly by the hair, not allowing the Margrave to justify himself or ask for anything. The Margrave claimed to be a descendant of the Holy Aegis family, and he offered money, women, swords, anything. But Azadin was unwavering. "He is the destroyer of holiness, Gerald." Threatening and showing his determination, he said. The Margrave was left in horror by this ruthless force, realizing that he had fallen into the hands of a true hunter of holiness. The Margrave's eyes were full of terror. Zebek appeared behind Azadin. The Margrave, in a panic, begged him for help, but he saw nothing. The Margrave recalled his aristocratic origins and belonging to a holy family. Looking coldly at Azadin, he noted that it was because of the commoners that he found himself in this situation. Azadin said that the Margrave still had enough strength to live. The Margrave was surprised by these words, and Azadin mockingly suggested thinking positively, saying that he especially needed this. The next moment, blood spilled onto the ground and the Margrave's scream pierced the air. Azadin noted that his contractor was dead, but he still completed the job. The Margrave's body fell to the ground, and the law of the Empire was fulfilled. Zebek pulled his sword from its sheath and stood in front of Azadin. He stated that as a knight of the king's church, he could not legally release him, even if he had done the right thing. The wounded Margrave lay on the ground, groaning in pain. Azadin noted that Zebek was not like the usual knights of the royal church. He explained that the others were just scum who had been thrown out of the house to settle inheritance disputes. Zebek accepted his words but did not look away, wondering if he could catch up with his opponent. Azadin said that they would meet again if fate brought them together, and disappeared, leaving behind only black smoke. Zebek was astonished. No one could defeat Azadin of the Gerald clan. Wounded knights lay around, groaning. He realized that the words about discarded waste were also true for him. His chest tightened, and he raised his head and looked at the sky for a long time. In the great hall, slaves knelt near the throne, begging to be exempted from taxes this year. They said that they were all fugitive nomads, homeless, starving vagabonds who had barely escaped from monsters and robbers. Paying taxes would simply destroy them. The man on the throne, Margrave Castle, thought about it, and he noted with mockery that in that case, they would soon ask for food as well. The slaves, horrified by his words, continued to beg, asking for mercy in their desperate situation. Kozel said that nothing would change their low origins, but promised to make a concession on special terms. 3 men were already hanging on the square, executed by ropes, and Cosell coldly remarked that the same fate awaited them all if the conditions were not met. He said that everything that was required could be contained on one page of the grimoire. The slaves admitted that they were not knowledgeable about magic and did not know what was being discussed. But Cosell insisted that even they should understand that all they had to do was wish, and the book would respond. If they could get even one page, he promised to free the village from taxes for 3 years and provide it with grain. When one of the slaves carefully noted that in order to search, one must at least know the name of the grimoire, the goat clenched his fist and replied, "This is a copy of the Divine King's book." The slaves were shocked and frightened when they heard this name. The goat was sitting on the throne when a snake crawled out from behind the curtain. She, having transformed into a girl, noticed that mentioning the book of the Divine King was an overly careless act. Kozel waved it off, but she reminded him that they had already combed every possible place in search of the grimoire, and rumors would soon spread across the continent. She said it would be wiser to get at least one page first. When asked what she was trying to achieve, the girl replied that she had to report the attack on his son. She reported that it happened in the east of the continent, but he only noted that his son's forces could not fall so easily because Sir Zebek was with him. However, the enemy turned out to be the Gerald clan. Kozel was surprised to remember that the heralds were also hunting for the Book of the Divine King and needed it to get rid of the curse of debt. When asked about the fate of her son, the witch replied that he had lost both eyes and reproductive organs. After a short thought, Kozel ordered soldiers to be sent to exterminate all the heralds in the area. The girl promised to contact the commander, but he told her to simply give the order. Grabbing her hand, he said that since his child was castrated, he needed a new one, and sitting her on his lap, he hugged her. The witch just smiled. It was early morning, and the sun's rays were breaking through the treetops and birds were circling in the sky. Azadin sighed, feeling the weight of the sitting owl on his shoulder. He complained of thirst and the futility of waiting for 2 days, blaming the spirits for the fact that due to their whims, he found himself on the verge of death. The owl reproached him for his insolence, but soon fell silent, and Azadin continued to reason about how, after the death of the emperor, the Gerald clan became despised by everyone and received the stigma of soulless destroyers of holiness. He complained that he had been forced to rush here without preparation and now risked dying not only from thirst, but also from hunger, since dry rations were useless without water. Suddenly, he and the owl became alert. Ghostly shadows began to emerge from behind the trees. Ghosts appeared before him, among whom he recognized Sophia, Ivan, and other deceased. They bowed their heads in greeting and warned that these lands were deprived of both royal virtue and the blessing of the archangels, and therefore dangerous for delay. Azadin replied that he had already avenged their insults, and now it was time for them to go to the afterlife. Sophia pointed to the well. Azadin was surprised, thinking that they were offering him water, and approached him. Looking inside, he pulled the rope, hoping to quench his thirst. But instead of water, there was sand in the bucket, and in the middle of it was a page with incomprehensible pictograms. Geralt's clan was originally a people known as the Aragus. After a devastating typhoon destroyed their homeland, they were forced to relocate and settle on the continent of Vibrise. The continent was once divided between 8 divine kings of the Aegis clan, each of whom ruled their own portion of the land from their own throne. During that era, one of the 8 divine kings usurped power over all the others. His 7 brothers and holy lords were completely suppressed, and the continent was ruled by the emperor of the Esled clan. He set himself the goal of destroying all remnants of the sacred royal line, erasing their power and influence. At the same time, the foreigners, the Aragas, who had survived the catastrophe on their continent, desperately needed a new land to live on. The emperor offered them a deal. He gave them the grimoire, Song of the Yellow Bird, which contained a spirit known as the Mouth of the Emperor. In exchange, the Aragas signed a contract with him and became the heralds, the emperor's sword, his loyal servants, and the Inquisition. From that moment on, their hands were stained with divine blood. It was the heralds who eliminated undesirable nobles who had enriched themselves illegally or rebelled against the authorities. For the inhabitants of Vibrisa, this was a grave sin, because in their beliefs, death was not the end. They revered the cycle of reincarnation and the afterlife. However, the death of the emperor destroyed the United Empire, splitting it into 8 independent kingdoms. And then the Aragasians were universally condemned. They began to be called soulless heralds, branded for their service to the emperor and for their reprisals. But this disgrace was followed by a new test. The contract concluded by their ancestors with the emperor did not disappear even after his death. The heralds remained bound by this oath forever, and the bonds of the treaty continued to operate through the generations. Now, centuries later, one of the pages of that very grimoire appeared before the eyes of Azzadin. It lay in a bucket, covered in sand. It was a page from the Book of the Divine King, the source of their divine power. Azzadin looked at her, realizing that he held in his hands the key to the very nature of the clan's power. Sophia and Ivan, now ghosts, waved their hands at Azzadin in a farewell gesture. He wished them to rest in peace, and he looked again at the page he had found. The thought was spinning in his head. Could she free him from the debt curse? An owl perched on his shoulder remarked that it was rude to call it a curse, since it was an honest payment of a debt. Azzadin thought that perhaps the page had appeared in his hands by itself, as if by fate, but he felt no joy. After all, in essence, this was the dream of all heralds, to fulfill a debt equal to 100,000 gold coins, and to obtain the Divine King's book to break the oath. This was their ultimate goal. He feared that this would now begin to spread throughout the world. The primary reason for the book's disintegration into pages was his own father. His thoughts were interrupted by a painful thirst. All this time, a girl and a guy were watching him from behind the rocks. Medium recognized him and called him the son of a clan traitor. Untalented, weak, and stupid. Also incapable of magic, as others said about him. The guy next to her just looked at her in surprise. The boy expressed doubt about the curse, but was sure that Azzadin was not capable of using magic. The girl said that until the age of 8, he wet the bed and could barely pull a bowstring. And she doubted that he would be able to fulfill the duty of the Gerald. Ismail suggested that Medium return home, pointing out that even if she was a relative of the contractor, it was not worth getting involved with such a low-ranking herald. Medium insisted on testing Azzadin, but the boy reminded that apprentices were not allowed to attack the heralds. The girl did not pay any attention to this and decided to simply ruin the arrows without killing him. Ismail noted that Azzadin was a student of Elder Casas, whose reputation was dubious. Medium believed that no matter how great Casas was a fool, even if he had been trained for decades. She spoke with disdain of Azzadin, the son of a traitor, incapable of magic but still listed as a herald. She complained that he was taking someone else's place, depriving people like her of the opportunity to become heralds. Drawing the arrows, she fired them forward. Azzadin sensed movement behind him, and Medium hurried to hide behind a rock. However, when she looked out, she was hit in the forehead with a stone and screamed. Ismail next to her also screamed. Azzadin approached and asked why she was shooting. Medium replied that it was a greeting. She was surprised that she had not noticed his presence. And then, to my surprise, I realized that he had caught the arrow in flight in his quiver. Azzadin asked their names, and the girl introduced herself as Medium of Edel, and the boy as Ismail, an apprentice sent to help them. As it didn't help, he was surprised by these stupid actions. Medium explained that she had thrown 2 arrows at him, noticing that his quiver looked empty. She replied that she had simply wanted to share the arrows. After this, Medium showed irritation at his mocking remark about the apprentices supposedly being bored in the Holy Lands. She explained that she belonged to the Edel clan. Azzadin emphasized that for Gerald, clan affiliation did not matter, and he reminded them that the apprentices were supposed to help him. He also accused them of trying to shoot him, and he hinted at possible educational measures if this were to happen again outside the Holy Lands. Medium was surprised at how different Azzadin was from the image that was created by rumors, not believing that this is the same person that everyone laughs at indiscriminately. Azzadin demanded respect from Medium, specifying whose side she was on, Aragus or his enemies. The girl got angry, but replied that she was a Media. Edel belongs to the Aragus family and apologizes. Azzadin accepted her apology, but sternly warned her not to shoot without intent to kill, especially outside the Holy Lands. He made it clear that he did not need an apprentice and was about to leave. But then Medium challenged him to a duel, despite the warnings of her companion, who considered Azzadin too dangerous and smart to be trifled with. But Medium thought that evading was a sign of cowardice. He was different from the rumors, and he was not an idiot. He was strong, proud, and not lacking in intelligence. Geralt Azzadin, Medium said loudly. She has formally challenged him to a duel for his position as herald. Azzadin realized that Medium had indeed challenged him, and Ismail could not hide his surprise. Azzadin thought that Ariel was a bad influence on these children. Azzadin warned Medium that it was not just a position that was at stake, but her life and everything she had. and the girl accepted the risk without hesitation. In his heart, he believed that the main problem was her underestimation of his strength. He offered her to surrender, but she was adamant. There were exactly 100 steps between them when Medium officially declared a duel. The Emperor's mouth, the spirit that every Geralt receives, confirmed the challenge, meaning it was impossible to refuse. An owl soared into the sky, warning of the seriousness of the situation. Medium was determined to win at any cost. The sun was beating down on the cracked earth when Medium and Ismail gave Azadin water. He drank it greedily, and they watched in suspense. The boy was perplexed when he saw how Azadin used an unusual technique, sacrificing accuracy for the speed of throwing stones. The rocks flew at Medium, but she instantly created a protective field, reflecting the attack. Azadin did not retreat, drawing his bow and throwing new stones. The technique he used, the yellow crane art, astounded even his opponents. Despite her fear, Medium held her sword and fought back, trying to counterattack. Suddenly, black smoke appeared, and Azadin, using agility, disappeared and appeared behind Medium. She activated her protective shield, but he grabbed her arm and put her at a disadvantage. The blow was accurate. The girl was thrown into the rock, crashing into it with all her force. Ismail raised a cry of indignation, accusing Azadin of insolence and cruelty, of insulting a noble family. He rushed to attack, but a voice announced the end of the duel. Medium lost and now became completely dependent on Azadin. Also, Ismail, who intervened in the duel, was declared his property. Medium was devastated. Clutching the weapon, she tried to commit suicide with a knife, but Azadin stopped her in time. He foresaw such an act and intervened, and the girl, falling to her knees, was overcome with despair. Azadin sternly reminded Medium that a young lady who lost a duel did not even have the right to die, and now she can die only with his permission or after his own death. He pointed out that she had thrown down the gauntlet without knowing the rules. Medium gritted her teeth in anger, but Azadin, as if tired of the children's whims, threw them back a bottle of water and declared that the lesson was over and they were free to go. Medium and Ismail were amazed by such unexpected mercy. Azadin suggested pretending that the duel had not happened. It would be bad if something like this were included in their recommendations. The sun continued to illuminate the rocks. Azadin confidently walked forward. He explained that he did not want to have slaves and freed them, ordering them to return to the sanctuary. Medium asked in surprise why he had rejected her, since she was a trained girl. Ismail felt ashamed of her behavior. Azadin noted that if Medium was as talented as Ariel, she would not have lost. He recalled that the world is full of men who like young girls, and that in some cultures, early marriage is allowed. In conclusion, he warned that next time one should carefully consider challenges to a duel, or better yet, not offer them at all. If you need to get rid of someone, it's easier to do it quietly and effectively while the enemy is sleeping. Ismail noticed that Azadin was much more talkative than he expected, but at the same time he gave the impression of genuine concern. Medium, listening to him, noted that this was something new for her. Ismail was surprised and asked again what exactly she meant. The contract of service between the Emperor and the Aragus was a mutual exchange of what each demanded. However, anyone who broke this contract faced a terrible death, originally a symbol of loyalty and honor. This contract became a terrible curse after the death of the Emperor. Despite the death of the Emperor, the conditions of service remained unchanged. The Aragus were forever bound to serve as heralds of the Emperor, maintaining a tight circle of subordination. With the signs of the oath breaking, the situation worsened. The Gerald clan intervened in the struggle for the throne of the Kingdom of Terrazar. One of the Aragus was victorious, obtaining a copy of the Divine King's book. But soon the book was stolen by a notorious traitor named Aker. The men in cloaks, representatives of the legitimate clan, demanded the return of the stolen book, threatening Aker with terrible torment and death if he did not fulfill their demand. Despite all the threats and attempts to return the book, the hope of its return faded away, melting into dust. Aker tore the book apart in the heart of the world's mountain range, scattering its pages to the wind, becoming the first victim of the contract's curse. Because of this, he gave birth to twins despite having a male body. Azadin and Ariel were brother and sister. Of these, it was Ariel who became the most powerful herald in the clan's history, while Azadin was called an idiot. But Medium doubted this slander. He was not at all what they said about him. Azadin was categorical. He was not going to take Medium and Ismail with him and ask them not to follow him. They were not following him, but were simply supposed to deliver a letter from the head of the Salasma region. Azadin believed that the old official did not like him. But the message was, copies of the Divine King's book keep appearing, and they need to be found. This will be taken into account in Azadin's recommendation. The other heralds also seemed to be aware of the copies of the book. Azadin asked Medium if she knew about it, to which she answered in the affirmative. It was Azadin's father who betrayed them all? This thought flashed loudly through Ismail's head, who quietly hit Medium in the leg to silence him. Tension arose between them. Azadin realized that they now had to go to Salazma to meet with the head of the region, which was inevitable. Azadin thanked them for passing on the letter. Medium, having learned that they were to go in the same direction, became interested. Is it possible to continue to follow him and tell what happened in the clan during his absence? Azadin replied that this road did not belong to him, and if they wanted, they could follow him. Medium was delighted, jumping up and down with joy, while Ismail looked on with obvious distress. Having made a halt under a tree, they rested near the giant goats, and the sun almost disappeared behind the mountains. Azadin woke up, started to pull himself up, and told everyone to wake up. There were white fluffy clouds floating in the sky, and they continued on their way. Not far from them, a thin stream flowed among large stones. Medium pointed to him, and they walked over to fill their bottles with water. Suddenly, a voice was heard nearby. Armed men asked who allowed them to take water from their stream. Azadin stated that he did not intend to fight and asked what they wanted in return. The men demanded everything they had, smiling. Azadin tried to negotiate, but the bandits did not accept compromises, and the commander ordered an attack. Kill everyone, but leave the girl alone. 5 minutes later, the bandits were beaten and lay on the ground begging for mercy. They claimed that they were not bandits, but simply captives of Marcraft's son, named Kazel, who was now looking for a certain book, agitating people to help him. Ismail asked incredulously how to find something that no one had seen. They wandered aimlessly until they came across Azadin and company. Medium suggested that it might just be a fantasy, and Azadin noted that rarely did anyone travel or trade along this road. Medium insisted on killing the bandits to get rid of them once and for all, but Azadin stopped her abruptly. Having stated that it is wrong to kill without a good reason, he explained that he did not intend to take their lives simply for convenience sake, because everyone deserves a second chance. The bandits chuckled, mocking Azadin's mercy and calling him a kind aristocrat. They assured him that his kindness would definitely result in retribution for him and his family. Azadin demanded silence. Ismail had seen many people who did not want to kill, but he was surprised that among them was someone from the Gerald clan. Suddenly, Azadin hit one of the bandits in the face. It was a precise blow that could leave you without an eye. Azadin warned the others that any sudden movement could cost them face. Despite their fear, the bandits reminded him that he had promised to spare them. Azadin confirmed his words, explaining that he intended to keep them from violence, even if they felt no remorse, and that he did so for their own good. The men were terrified of his determination and strength. Medium expressed her doubts but agreed with the situation. Ismail supported her. Suddenly, screams were heard. An owl sitting on a tree carefully watched what was happening. Soon, the beaten men were helping each other walk, feeling pain and despair. One of them thought bitterly that he would no longer have children. Suddenly, one of the men, making a bold threat, was grabbed by a giant hand. This hand squeezed him so hard that his head instantly separated from his body. A huge monster appeared before them, an ogre who grabbed people and put them in a huge jug on his back. Small goblins ran around him, greedily devouring the bodies of their victims. The orc declared that the humans belonged to gold and contemptuously threw them into his backpack. He laughed as he looked at the city nearby, a large fortress that made him thirsty and angry. He looked forward to many victims, calling them meat and smiling ominously. Azadin, together with Midyam and Ismail, continued their journey, traveling on animals. Midyam initially thought he was being too lenient, but then admitted that it was a good approach, especially considering they had received weapons. Azadin noted that it is difficult to understand those in whose skins he has never been. Losing an eye is not just a trauma. The consequences are much deeper. People they once saw as victims now become a source of fear for them, and this may become an opportunity for their repentance. Ismail noted that Azadin spared the men and gave them a chance to improve. They walked on, stopped, got off the animals. Azadin said that the conversation he heard had made him nervous. The name of Margrave Kozel, who was looking for a copy of the Divine King's book, was mentioned. Ismail was surprised because Kozel had fallen behind in the race for the throne. Could he really try to catch up with his competitors using the magical knowledge from the book? Azadin removed his mask and explained that he was temporarily abandoning the Gerald mask in order to protect himself on Count Kozul's territory. Midyam and Ismail were shocked to see that Azadin had a scar instead of eyes. Azadin did not stumble, although he did not see. Ismail wondered how this was possible. Azadin replied that he himself did not know. It was just that he could do without eyes since birth. Midyam came up to get a better look at his face. Azadin was surprised and asked what happened. The girl was shocked, but said that the scars even made him look better. Azadin was even more surprised. The media assumed he was a handsome man until an accident took his eyes. She added that it was better to have scars than a beautiful face with unpleasant eyes. Ismail remarked that this was rude. Azadin said that Midyam was repeating the words of the one who inflicted these wounds. Midyam asked who it was. Azadin said it was Ariel, who thought it was strange that he had no eyes and cut his face to imagine beautiful eyes where the scars were. Thanks to this, Azadin was able to successfully feign blindness. When he was alone, this did not create problems. Midyam asked if they should play along with him pretending to be blind, but Azadin said they shouldn't. They continued on their way and a view of the city opened up before them. There was a long line of people and knights standing at the city gates, carefully checking everyone who entered. Ismail noticed that the line was very long, although the gates were visible. Azadin remembered that he had not been to the eastern gate of the village for a long time. Midyam noted that the village is an important starting point where the imperial road begins. Azadin replied that he was a pilgrim on a solitary journey, and that Midyam and Ismail were just children who had accidentally crossed his path. Suddenly, he turned around and called Ismail Puppy Eyes, reminding him of the previous visit. The knights searched people, forcing them to undress and taking away valuables, which caused suffering to the people. Midyam considered this theft. Ismail noted that this had never happened before. Azadin assumed that the knights were looking for something very carefully. One of the men in front asked Azadin if he was blind, to which he replied, not really, he was being guided by orphans on his journey. The man said that there are rumors about pages of the Divine King's book, copies of which are being distributed, and that they are being hunted, mainly by Margrave Castle. Azadin was surprised by the number of such morons. This is not good. It will be difficult to solve this problem. A man trying to protect his family from starvation shouted for his money, but was hit by a knight and fell. The knights joked that the grimoire could take the form of money, promising to carefully examine everything and return it if it was not a book. The man sitting on the floor sighed heavily. The girl intervened and stood up for him, declaring that stealing was wrong, demanding that the things be returned. The knights rudely replied that any objections would be punished by beatings. The man tried to protect the girl by hugging her and pointed out that the threat to the child was violence. One of the knights struck him in the chest and the girl screamed, "Daddy!" running to her lying father. The knight cynically said that the children should have been raised better. Then he called the next one. Midyam was angry, calling them crazy bastards. Ismail asked what to do next. Midyam suggested joining the fight, but Azadin stopped them. One of the men approached the knight and whispered something, causing him to look surprised. Azadin watched what was happening. Soon several men carrying chests passed through the gate and began to run. The crowd wondered what was going on and why people were packing up. Azadin explained that ogres had been spotted nearby and that they were going to close the gates. He had heard everything thanks to his good hearing. The crowd demanded that the gates be opened and asked to discuss the situation. Meanwhile, a camp was set up in the forest, and several carriages with horses, guarded by knights, stood nearby. The bastard of Margrave Castle asked if the knights were sure that the gates were securely closed, and received an affirmative answer. He was informed that no copies of the Divine King's book had been spotted in the area. The bastard wanted to leave with the collected goods, but suddenly he heard a cry. Commander Thor asked what he should do. The bastard ordered them to fight off the ogres if they got too close. The bastard reminded that the knights were specially trained for such cases. Sir Thor, thinking that the preparations had only lasted one day, asked to let the civilians outside and take command of the defense. The bastard doubted his abilities since he wasn't even a knight, but eventually agreed to entrust him with this task. Then the bastard rode away in his carriage with satisfaction, and Sir Thorgy was left alone. He felt the ground shaking under his feet. The man in the jug thought that they were about to be eaten by monsters, feeling fear and unwillingness to die. Through a small gap, he saw many approaching monsters shouting, "Meat!" There was a man standing on the tower, watching the forest fire and the ogres, and he was shocked by what was happening. Among the crowd was Azadin, who noticed the approaching monsters. A long line of people with torches, horses, and carts was descending from the mountain. The woman carried a lantern and warned that the road would become more difficult. She asked Ismail to carefully guide his uncle and sister while passing on the spare flashlight. Ismail thanked him and promised to take care of his uncle. Azzadin thought people became friendlier when he pretended to be blind. The knights and mercenaries retreated. Sir Thor's voice was heard at the gate, suggesting that they gather all who could fight to fight back. This will allow the elderly and wounded to leave the village faster. The man assured his daughter Cosette that he would protect her, despite her doubts. Azzadin thought. Medium was angry that the knights who were supposed to serve the people had driven them away. She called them pathetic. Azzadin considered people as a sacrifice for the sake of time for others. Medium was surprised. The Araga's sympathy for the Vibris people left her doubtful. Azzadin expressed solidarity with them and suggested that they split up. Suddenly he disappeared, and Ismail and Medium shouted after him in surprise. Night fell on the castle. The gates were locked. Knights and common people took their places on the walls. The captain reported that there were too many enemies. Orcs and goblins were already approaching the gates. The orc leader, huge and strong, shouted for meat and demanded the village, stamping his foot. Thor pointed to him as the leader and the archers began firing. Arrows flew into the crowd of monsters. The masked goblin commanding the attack ordered them to rush forward. The orcs and goblins went to storm, and Sir Thorgi on the wall ordered to defend the gates. A huge orc picked up a stone and threw it at the gate. The people from inside held the doors. The man, thinking about his daughter Cosette, shot arrows into the sky, begging her to run away. The goblin commander, hiding behind the vessel with the captives, came up with a plan. He raised the flaming staff and released a flash into the sky, assuring that the divine king's book was close. Azzadin appeared from the sky, hit the goblin in the face, and he went on the attack. The thrown stone hit the wall with force, scattering people. But Azzadin was nearby, declaring his readiness to help with the defense. Sir Thor was surprised to hear his name, and was surprised to find that he was the Emperor's herald. But Azzadin had already jumped from the wall into the thick of the enemies. His arrows hit the target right on target. The orc lost both eyes and, screaming in pain, began to trample his own goblins. Azzadin, standing on the head of the blinded orc, continued to fire at the goblins below, methodically clearing the space. From the walls of the castle, people watched his actions, amazed by what they saw. His gaze caught on a huge jug, and he recognized the bandit he had met recently as having fallen from it. He was still alive, but he groaned in horror when a goblin appeared nearby, reaching for the staff, repeating the words about the book of the divine king. The goblin proclaimed himself the future king of the Fangs, and before our eyes he transformed. Numerous mouths studded with sharp teeth grew out of his body. He was now a completely different monster and was rapidly approaching Azzadin, who was still clinging to the orc. Azzadin noted that the situation was turning into a serious problem when the monster rushed to attack. Branches with fangs rushed towards the orc, entwining and tearing his flesh. The orc roared in pain, complaining that he loved to eat but couldn't stand being eaten, and soon disappeared into the monster's mouth, covering everything around him with blood. Azzadin managed to jump back and landed on the ground right in front of the ugly monster. The men on the castle walls recognized him as the divine cultist of the King of Fangs. The creature once again took the form of a goblin with a staff and directed the light at Azzadin. Aiming for his chest, the page was there. He grabbed his heart and the page appeared. The goblin demanded that he hand over a page of the Book of the Divine King, promising a quick death in exchange. However, he didn't have time to finish. Azzadin's arrow interrupted his speech. The goblin managed to dodge. Azzadin wondered if his beams were pointing to the location of the page, and why these creatures needed a book at all. The monster rushed forward, releasing new branches with fangs. Azzadin, clutching his sword, struck quickly, cutting them off one after another and moving forward. The fangs with their roots cut off fell to the ground, and he noted that they were much weaker without their long roots. The goblin, shouting that he was the King of Fangs, received in response that he was only a pitiful likeness. Azzadin went on the attack again. The weapon was bubbling with a purple substance that could corrode even steel. The goblin, enraged, leapt forward, screaming of his imminent death. Azzadin noted with irritation that it was unpleasant to work so hard without even receiving a gold coin for it. The order was given to the archers, and the arrows flew straight towards the approaching fanged monster. Sir Thor commanded that Gerald be helped, despite fears that the royal church would consider it a crime. He noted that the church had always neglected them and gave the order to shoot. The archers agreed, deciding to kill the monster first and then think about Gerald. A stream of arrows fell on the monster, and Azadin noted that he could have simply taken these arrows for himself, but still decided to go on the attack. Grabbing the torn-off fang from the ground, he rushed at the enemy, mockingly returning the teeth to their owner. The goblins shouted about his future dominance as the Fang King and Divine King. But Azadin, calling himself the Destroyer of Holiness, raised another fang and threw it at the monster. He threw them again and again until the opponent's head flew off the body and fell to the ground. The goblin's staff lay nearby. Azadin took it for himself. Sir Thor called him a heartless renegade. He ordered the shooting to cease. Azadin noted that it would be stupid to shoot at him now. The warriors began to talk among themselves that he must have brought these monsters here, because their appearance seemed strange. Several voices accused him of being an atheist. Azadin was deep in thought. The voices of people blaming him for the monsters echoed in Azadin's head. He admitted that he himself did not know where they came from, and reminded that he was acting only for imperial gold coins, one of which someone used to help the village. The words about the wish made to Gerald caused surprise and suspicion among those gathered. When asked who exactly did this, Azadin refused to answer, causing anger. He challenged them to challenge him, reminding them that their patron had fled at the first sign of danger, which only hurt them more. A bandit emerged from the huge jug, crying with fear, when he saw Azadin, but he only advised him to appreciate the second chance he had received. The man fell to his knees, and Azadin approached the warriors, one of whom was already pulling the bowstring. Sir Thorgi stopped them, ordering them not to shoot. Azadin came for the arrows. He took several. Sir Thor thanked him. Azadin noted that such words could have cost Sir Torgi his life if the zealot of the faith had found out about it. Azadin left the castle walls and walked along an empty forest road. It was dark, and only his steps broke the silence. An owl was flying nearby. He admitted that he had lied about the gold coin, but otherwise people would have been shaking for their lives, endlessly working off their debt to him. The owl asked if it made him angry that, having defeated the monster, he received such ingratitude from people. Azadin replied that people were weak, but while he pretended to be blind, they were nice, and that earned him gratitude. He complained of fatigue because he had traveled in vain and had received no coins. Soon children with torches appeared ahead and also noticed him. Ismail was surprised by his appearance. Azadin said that he met with an impersonator of the cult king, but he was not strong. Ismail noted that he had wasted his energy and was left without a reward. Azadin recalled Midyam's words that helping others is wonderful, and added that life without beauty is boring. Midyam called Ismail boring, which made him angry. Azadin clarified how they managed to escape. Midyam replied that they were initially dissuaded, but they insisted on their own, and the people let them go, even giving them torches. She assumed it was because of her beauty. Azadin doubted it and joked that it was more likely her age. Midyam was offended and said that she was already 13. And in the north there was a queen her age. Azadin asked Midyam if she recognized the staff. She replied that it was the magic staff that the impersonator had, and she admitted that she would have to try hard to research it, but now she doesn't have the strength. Surprised, she asked if he recognized her as his assistant. Azadin replied that it was not so difficult to do a favor for a fellow countryman, but Midyam said that she wanted a favor in return. He agreed that she would examine him tomorrow. Suddenly, Azadin, jumping up a tree, said that they had to hurry. People with children, carts, and things walked ahead. The moon lit up the sky. The woman looked back and saw Azadin pretending to be blind. She said that the children went to look for him. He explained that he had lost his way a little, but the children were smart and would soon catch up, and then noted that the sounds of victory shots could be heard from the direction of the village. He suggested giving a lantern signal so that the defenders would know that they could return. The old man noticed that the lanterns on the gates had already been lit, and people began to rejoice. The woman ordered a group to be sent to check, but when she turned around, she did not find Azadin. At this time, he was already hurrying back, thinking how lazy he was to do this and that. If he just lay down for a second, he would fall asleep. Suddenly, he noticed smoke in the middle of the mountain and wondered what was there. The knights set up camp in the mountains, pitching tents and sitting around a fire. One of them noted that despite the drought and the appearance of the ogres, the Margrave still cared only about some book and not about his people, and he suggested that the place was doomed. Another added that their job was simply to get the job done, but he wouldn't mind a longer-term employment to earn more. Azadin, watching from the cliff, thought that this seemed to be the camp of the escaped bastards. He saw 2 knights guarding the entrance to the tent, and the boxes inside contained various things. Realizing that he himself was broke, he considered this a jackpot. The owl noted that the money would come in handy, and Azadin noted that traveling was an expensive thing. The bastard screamed, accusing the knights of stealing supplies and demanding an explanation for why he had hired them. The knights justified themselves by saying that they were attacked and did not have time to recover. He lashed out at the heretic who was cutting the apple, and when he heard him agree with his words, he was guilty. Tarj decided to cut the pay of the two he had pointed out. There were no objections. The heretic, holding the knife, noticed that his item had also disappeared, and this was the work of a not-so-simple thief. He asked Sir Torgi to send a search order to the nearest settlement, but the bastard objected that the power there belonged to the local aristocrats, and this would be difficult, and besides, he did not see any benefit in this for himself. The heretic smiled and said that he would then turn this place upside down in the name of the bastard, and stabbed him in the stomach. The blade, which was a gift from the witch, began to emit a purple magical glow, and a spider-like creature appeared from it. It crawled inside the bastard, who screamed in horror. The heretic calmly explained that the spider only pinches a little, but if he does not obey him, the spider will lay eggs in his body, and when they hatch, the real show begins. The bastard screamed in horror, asking what he wanted from him. The knight stood stunned, watching what was happening. The heretic came up and grabbed the bastard by the shoulder, declaring that he would plunder the station village and catch the rat who had stolen his things. Meanwhile, morning was coming. The sun was already shining. Under the tree, Midyam and Ismail were sleeping on the animals. An owl sat on a branch and announced that it was 10:04 a.m., after which they woke up. Medium stretched, and opening her eyes, they saw Azadin in front of them. She noticed that he already had two staffs, and he explained that the day before he had come across mercenaries and found another one in their supplies. Azadin noted that the staff was similar to the one the goblin had, and held it out to Medium, offering to take a look. Ismail decided to check if the artifact was cursed and, using his power, saw an astral image in black and green tones. Azadin guessed that if it were a thing of the Fang King, the image would be red, and wondered if the staff belonged to another cult. Ismail replied that its function is to search for a given target, but it is quite fragile and easily breaks. Azadin noted that, despite the simplicity of execution, the creator was clearly not a small fry, and he assumed that it was created to track copies of the Divine King's book. He came to the conclusion that there were probably more than two such staffs, which meant that surveillance of the books would only intensify. Azadin decided to take a look at the owners of these items. Azadin settled on a tree branch and carefully watched the knights camp. Overnight, the atmosphere changed. The knights became more serious and angry, as if preparing for battle. They carefully polished their weapons and checked their armor, demonstrating their readiness for a serious clash. Azadin suggested that their goal might be related to finding pages from the royal book. He was surprised that the knights decided to go to war right away, instead of first thinking about their actions after losing the staff. Azadin shared his observations with Medium and Ismail, that the knights were probably going to attack the nearest settlement, a settlement near the railway station, which was larger in size than the average village. Medium noted that such reckless actions are usually taken only in desperate situations. Azadin thought about it and, taking the staff in his hands, suggested that it was this object that could have been the reason for such a sharp change in the knights' moods and plans. They stood on the ramp leading to the castle. The sun was already setting behind the horizon. People were walking around the streets of the castle. Life continued to go on as usual. The knights stood guard, checking the documents of those passing by. One of the knights, examining the papers, made it clear that blind pilgrims were allowed through without any problems. And indeed, the check was superficial. This surprised Medium, but Ismail noted that they were deceiving the guards a little. Entering the settlement, they walked through the bustling market, looking around carefully. Ismail was pleased to notice a trading van from Karazar, a sign that there would be a respite ahead. There were crowds of people all around them, and life in the castle went on as usual. Azodin clarified that the trade van belonged to Karazar, after which they continued on their way forward. The boy, along with two of his comrades, approached Azodin's sister and asked with obvious disdain if she really was the younger Gerald. At the same time, Derek reminded her that she was the child of a traitor, and in her position she should not even look into the eyes of those around her. Ariel, the great genius of the clan who became a herald at the age of 3, came to mind. Derek recalled learning the truth through pain and a broken knee in his younger years, realizing that it was only part of his journey. Ariel was much more than just a strong personality. Now he was an adult and sat in a chair, repeating the name. Ariel. Suddenly a noise caught his attention. In the square, merchants displayed their wares, and men juggled, entertaining the crowd. Azzedine, along with Midyam and Ismail, moved through the crowd. The flag of the Karazara Trade Association fluttered before them. This organization originally started out as a group of small traders, but over time it has grown into the largest structure in Khorasan. In fact, behind the facade of trade, there was a secret organization led by Gerald, the leader of the Aragus people. All the traders in the association were also Aragus. Azzedine decided to keep a low profile. Medium and Ismail were delighted at the upcoming opportunity to swim. However, a voice came from behind, and several men recognized it as the famous 108th spirit, Azzedine. Inquiring how he had been doing for the last 3 months, they taunted him by saying that they had even sent him apprentices, hinting at Medium and Ismail. They were upset. Azzedine replied that these children were not his apprentices, and he asked for help with shoeing his goat, as well as to exchange some things for money, and if possible, to give out Blue River arrowheads. The men agreed, but continued to tease him by mentioning that he had become herald on Cass's recommendation. Without going through the formal procedures, they called me a coward who couldn't even cope with basic training. Azzedine's things assumed that he had stolen them and doubted his rank as herald. Azzedine asked them for a change of clothes, noting that his clothes needed to be washed. Ismail was horrified, but Medium reminded him that, despite the circumstances of his birth, Azzedine was still a Gerald, and it was their duty to help him. One of the men threw him a change of clothes, which turned out to be a pink dress. Azzedine, looking at him, noted that he was tired of such childish teasing and did not want to start a fight. The men reacted sharply, expressing disdain for his rank and implying that he was simply lucky to be among the 108 spirits. A voice was heard from behind, suggesting that they resolve the conflict with a duel, hinting at their fear of the consequences of defeat. It turned out to be Medium, who accused them of empty chatter. The men responded mockingly, saying that Azzedine would not survive even one blow. Medium doubted their words. After the explosion, the men were confused, and Medium found herself on the back of one of them, pressing a knife to his throat. She coldly reminded him of his position, introducing herself as the heiress of Adal, and accused him of disrespecting Gerald Azzedine. A thin trickle of blood flowed from the man's throat. She challenged the scoffers to back up their words with actions, reproaching them for forgetting their duty to Gerald. The men tried to justify themselves, but at that moment a crowd led by a stranger approached them. The man, observing the situation, noted that the situation was getting tense and greeted Azzedine. Introducing himself as Derek Savan, he apologized for the behavior of his subordinates, and he asked Medium to stop to avoid serious consequences. The girl thought for a moment, but agreed, jumping to the side. One of the men she attacked remained angry, but his friends suggested leaving things as they were. Derek ordered his men, Pietro and Corsac, to return to duty, and then he suggested that Azzedine wash up and join him for dinner. Azzedine, although he was puzzled as to why this was necessary, agreed. In his tent, he took a shower, soaked in the bath, and felt better. Behind him, Ismail's voice was heard, who, soaking in the barrel, asked why Azzedine had not reacted in any way to what had happened earlier. He reminded that, despite the circumstances of her birth, others should at least respect Errol, and everyone who insulted his sister always received a response. Azzedine noticed that Ariel had a different approach. Ismail called him a strange man, to which Azzedine replied that this was precisely why it was worth convincing Medium to go her own way. Otherwise, she would become infected with his strangeness, and he left the tent. The tent was lit up with soft light, and treats were laid out on the table. Apples, pies, and a pie. Azzedine, sitting down at the table, noticed that there was some strange liquid in his plate. Derek asked if he had heard anything about Ariel. Azzedine replied in the negative, and noted that he was thinking about her again. Was he still so fixated on her? Derek was surprised and asked if he was worried about his older sister. But Azzedine only noted that with her skills there was no reason to worry about her. Derek expressed bewilderment that he had already managed to quarrel with the members of the association when he came here. Azzedine reached for the apples, but Derek took them away and turned the conversation to results. Azzedine said he was doing his job well and had at least earned some gold coins. However, Derek clarified that this was a real case, an attack on another trade association to keep them under control. Azzedine refused and offered to look at something more important, handing him the staff. Derek immediately recognized the item, noting that similar ones were used by the cult's divine bishops to search for pages of the Book of the Divine King. He also mentioned that the daughter of the Edel clan had delivered a letter from the regional leader, and according to him, that was why she had been summoned. Azzedine realized that it seemed like everyone knew about it now. Derek added that if he had been more diligent in sending reports, he wouldn't have been left in the dark. Derek noted that the staves themselves were a good catch, but a page or copy of the Book of the Divine King would be far more valuable. Azzedine calmly replied that he had that too, and reached out his hand to the apple. He took the fruit and calmly took a bite, wondering if the other heralds had probably returned empty-handed. Before he could finish speaking, Derek suddenly grabbed his hand holding the apple and, raising his voice, demanded that he immediately hand over the fragment of the book. Azzedine was only slightly surprised when he looked at him. The sun slowly disappeared behind the horizon, painting the market with the warm shades of sunset. Trading continued. People slowly moved from one shop to another, checking out the prices of the goods. Medium and Ismail were near their goat, when Derek's angry cry was heard from the tent standing a little behind. Inside the tent, Azzedine sat across from him, holding an apple in his hand. Derek frowned as he talked about entrusting them with the book fragment. After all, they will be able to protect him much better than Azzedine with his weakness. Azzedine calmly noted that such a decision would be too expensive for Derek. He warned that one of the Margrave's bastards and his mercenaries were already heading their way, and that there was a cultist among them. Derek asked with a grin if Azzedine thought they were incapable of handling them. He was inferior to Errol, but he was a former herald himself. Azzedine replied that this was precisely the problem. It was too easy to arouse suspicion if an ordinary merchant suddenly showed excessive force. However, Derek insisted that protecting the Divine King's book page was more important than any concerns. He added that Azzedine was also much weaker than Arail. He only reminded that in childhood he was indeed inferior to her, but since then he has become much stronger. True, Errol has now become the strongest in the clan, surrounded by countless followers. Azzedine admitted that he had not seen his sister for a whole year, and it was hard to imagine how much she had grown in strength during this time. Nevertheless, he said that he would personally hand over a page of the book to the regional leader for the common good. What an arrogant jerk, Derek said irritably, reminding him that he was, by the way, the eldest. At that moment, the tent flap opened and a breathless man ran in. He shouted that there was trouble at the eastern gate. The sun had already set behind the horizon. Previously, the post at the eastern gate was guarded by armed guards. A rider on a white horse rode up to them. It was the bastard with his servant. He noted that the knights looked ready for battle. They reported that the entrance was closed at that hour, and they would have to set up camp nearby, returning tomorrow. The bastard tried to resolve the issue differently, handing the knight a bag of coins as a sign of gratitude. The guard, calling him Sir Thorgy, remarked that they were both knights and would suffer the same punishment from the church in case of trouble. The conversation was suddenly interrupted. The knight received a sword blow right in the eye. The heretic struck, the knight collapsed, and the bastard's men fell upon the remaining guards, killing them. The bastard asked in shock why there was a need to kill. The heretic wanted to have fun. What kind of raid was this if even this was not allowed? The bastard noted that this would complicate their path. There were as many as 3 gates here, but the heretic didn't care. Then he looked at his palm, from which a dark hole glinted in the torchlight. Tiny spiders crawled out of it. He blew on his palm, and the swarm, along with dust, scattered among the knights. The guards began to scream in horror about spiders, scratch themselves desperately, and fall to the ground, writhing in pain. After a while, they stood up and were full of strength. The bastard, seeing this, called the man a heretic of the cult. He just grinned and said that he had waited a long time for him to figure it out. The heretic offered to cooperate. He would receive the Book of the Divine King, and the bastard would receive the opportunity to take revenge. Without waiting for an answer, the heretic blew again, this time on the bastard himself. Bastard's belly swelled sharply, and writhing blisters began to erupt from it. The bastard screamed in unbearable pain and collapsed to the ground. The heretic calmly noted that he had no choice anyway. The knights and mercenaries, having witnessed this scene, looked at him with horror. In a cold voice, the heretic ordered that no one be released and that the rat be taken alive. His men did not hesitate to rush to carry out the order. At the same time, the castle itself still maintained a seeming calm. The man with the backpack, leaving the tent, sighed with relief, but suddenly noticed that the crowd was gathering and moving towards the eastern gate. Coming closer, he asked what was going on. One of the locals explained that the mercenaries had forbidden leaving the settlement. Another one was indignant, asking why they were blocking the exit, and received only a cold answer. The guard said so, so it's not allowed. The attempt to pass ended instantly. A huge hand grabbed the man by the head and lifted him off the ground. The others stood frozen in horror as the mercenary, with spiders crawling on his skin, said he was hungry. His mouth transformed into a monstrous one with fangs, and he reached out to his victim. At the moment when the man in his grip closed his eyes in fear, a shadow appeared behind the monster. The unknown person jumped on his back, and with one precise movement plunged the sword straight into his head. The victim fell to the ground. Azadan stood on it, slowly pulling the spear out of the pierced head. The spear in his hands were covered in tiny spiders. These were the followers of the Spider Queen. Atra realized Azadin. The people around ran in different directions, frightened by what they saw. Azadin continued to stand on the fallen man, carefully watching what was happening. A voice came from behind him. It was Medium, who asked if he had defeated his attacker. Azadin replied that this was only the beginning. He ordered everyone to head to the tents to stock up on provisions and water. Ismail asked in surprise if it was really that urgent, to which Azadin explained how many people had already died from hunger. Suddenly, Medium screamed, warning of approaching danger. Azadin turned around and saw a man possessed by spiders. His mouth had become huge and terrible. Other similar creatures repeated the same thing. "I'm hungry for meat." They came closer and closer, as if controlled by spiders that controlled their nervous system. Azadin wondered what would happen if he used electricity against this creature. He grabbed a rag and threw it at the monster, then released a magical flash. The radiance blinded everyone around, and the possessed man screamed in pain. However, at the very last moment, a giant spider's paw almost hit Azadin, forcing him to quickly jump back. Giant spider legs appeared from the back of one of the transformed ones, which made Azadin smile. The mutant had clearly evolved. A burning torch flew towards him, which he deftly caught and began waving in front of the monsters. They began to retreat, complaining about the fire, and Azadin set fire to a circle around them, causing the monsters to scream and become afraid. People, seeing the reaction of the monsters, went on the offensive, demanding that the enemies be burned. Azadin warned to be careful not to set fire to the merchants' tents. The monsters caught fire and soon died, and Azadin watched the fire. After the battle, he asked Mediam and Ismail about their water and food supplies. They reported that they had collected everything they needed. They also offered to take them under their leadership, considering themselves useful. At that moment, an owl landed on Azadin's shoulder and announced a new contractor. The contractor was in the west and had just died. Azadin was upset by the news. He raised his sword and signaled his two comrades to prepare to open fire as they headed towards the western gate. He jumped sharply into the air, preparing for battle. Medium thought that at this rate he would be bossing them around more and more. Ismail agreed. Azadin charged into the fray, striking at the spider-like monsters that did not retreat and continued to approach. He noted that an ordinary person would have fallen in such a fight long ago, but these creatures do not die, but mutate and reproduce at an alarming rate. Azadin understood that large monsters created a serious obstacle on the way to the contractor. At that moment, an arrow appeared in the sky, sparkling with blue lightning, which hit one of the monsters. It flared with a white glow and fell to the ground. It was Medium. She foresaw the effectiveness of lightning against creatures vulnerable to fire. Medium almost fell over from fatigue, and Ismail hastened to support her, noticing her condition. Azadin thought for a moment and admitted that Medium was indeed well-trained and truly worthy of the Edel family. The girl smiled back, but he reminded that the powers of nature from the grimoires cannot be used too often and advised Medium to rest. Ismail noticed that Medium was not trying for nothing. She wanted to earn his recognition. Ismail then asked if the contractor had died, to which Azadin confirmed the bad news. Ismail wondered why continue then if the customer was dead. Azadin replied that a contract is a contract, and he cannot leave without fulfilling it to the end. Ismail noted that they would not be able to cope with the multitude of mutants. Azadin agreed, explaining that his goal now was to find and destroy the leader of these creatures, moving forward towards him. A peaceful day turned into a living hell as the fortress was engulfed in flames. The western gate found itself in the center of the bloodshed. Fallen warriors lay everywhere, and the spider-like creatures slowly approached, devouring the remains of the bodies. Amidst the chaos stood the heretic, watching the proceedings with a smirk. The bastard asked him with concern whether such lawlessness would not come back to haunt them, since for the sake of the Holy Scripture, they used two cruel methods. The heretic replied that the situation, although different from what they had imagined, was generally going well. The bastard was indignant. At this rate, their target would easily slip away. The heretic was lost in thought when he noticed a strange sign under one of the corpses, a triangle with a coin inside. He knew it was a symbol that summoned the gold coin demon. Thoughts about the heralds came to the heretic's mind. These mysterious people are also hunting for the book of the divine king. Perhaps the rat that stole his staff was related to them. When the bastard asked if the heretic intended to challenge the heralds, he replied that if necessary, yes. But apparently the order has already been accepted, and Gerald will appear soon. Suddenly there was an explosion behind the bastard. He turned and screamed. The arrow almost hit the heretic, but he managed to grab it and break it with his hand. He was angry, looking into the distance, where the next moment one of the arrows had already hit him in the face. The heretic realized that someone had deliberately weakened the first shot. The fight was just beginning. The arrow was stuck in the heretic's head, but he remained alive. Huge spider legs emerged from his chest and a sinister smile played across his face. Azzadin charged, aiming his sword at him. The heretic, calling Azzadin the Imperial Geralt, responded with blows, holding his sword in his hand. His face was distorted with pain with each blow. The bastard, crouched to the side, watched the battle in horror, inwardly rejoicing at his instinctive reaction to duck out of danger. But at the same time, he realized that the outcome of the battle did not bode well for him. The fight continued and neither side gave up. Azzadin understood that this was their leader, since he was able to mutate so strongly and retain his strength. The heretic made no secret of his contempt, calling Azzadin a tough little rat and claiming that strength alone would not be enough to kill him. The mutation intensified. Spider-like creatures crawled over the heretic's body and face. Azzadin approached, continuing to attack, calling the enemy just a bug. The heretic responded with furious cries and curses. Using his strength, Azzadin deftly rushed behind his opponent, noting that he couldn't even scratch his back. Concentrating, he used the power of Omel and delivered a sharp blow with the knife to the heretic's throat. The bastard, watching, turned away in horror and disgust. The heretic's head fell at his feet. But then the bastard's voice made Azzadin stop. He turned to him, recognizing him as Gerald, and said that he could not kill him. Azzadin was indifferent to the social status of a heretic, even if he was an aristocrat, and was about to say so, but the bastard interrupted him. He asked to listen and showed an imperial gold coin, taking it out of the bag. When Azzadin asked where he got this coin, Bastard replied that his mother gave it to him. He explained that the Gerald clan was powerless against the imperial gold coins. Azzadin asked what to do with it if there is no corresponding request. Then the bastard threw a coin into the drawn triangle, and it lit up. The bastard confessed that the spider devil had infected him with a spell and asked for help. The owl on Azzadin's shoulder reported that the request had been accepted. Even from such scum applications were accepted. Azzadin watched what was happening with amazement and some irritation, and the bastard joyfully shouted that he would live. Azzadin approached Medium and Ismail, clutching his head from the weight of what was happening. Medium and Ismail were surprised to learn that Bastard was a real contractor. Azzadin confirmed this and asked the Medium to use the blue lightning again. The girl was surprised at first, but after thinking about it, she agreed to help, reminding him that they were from the same clan. Even though she was not yet an apprentice, she would help with the contract, which made her happy and determined. Azzadin, hearing her indignation, accepted her as an apprentice. She promised to try her best. Ismail noted with surprise that he had never seen Medium so determined in her search for recognition. Ismail recalled how he had previously threatened Medium that he would jump off a waterfall, and she had reacted to this indifferently, only saying, "Go ahead." He couldn't understand why she took his actions so calmly, while Azzadin easily won her attention. Ismail clenched his fists in anger, considering this unfair. Azzadin, playfully teasing the submissive Ismail, spoke of puppy eyes and offered beef. Meanwhile, Medium began preparing for her reception. She intended to weaken the target so much that he would barely survive. The bastard watched in surprise as Medium activated her power, a blue lightning bolt that struck straight at him. He lit up as if he had been hit by an X-ray. Medium clutched her head, breathing heavily after using her power. Azzadin, noticing this, inquired about her condition. But at the same time, he noted that he now looks like a commander who drives his subordinates to exhaustion. Medium assured that she would return to normal after a little rest, emphasizing that as a daughter of the Idol clan, she was not that weak. The bastard lay motionless on the ground, smoke rising from his body. The bastard started to rise, looking at his hands. There was anger in his eyes, and small spiders were falling out of his body. Azadin and Medium tensed, watching him with horror. When asked about the reason for their reaction, Azadin replied that he should have demonstrated his bad tendencies less. The bastard took this as an insult. Ismail offered to kill him, since the order had already been completed. But Azadin abruptly cut off such words, noting that the request was not yet complete. Looking up at the owl, Azadin reminded him that the Emperor's eye had accepted this man's request, and therefore he deserved protection. When meeting with a contractor, you should sincerely try to help him, even if the initial request has already been fulfilled. After all, the Emperor's eye feeds on the contractor's own energy. However, he thought that he would prefer to get rid of the remaining settlements and spider mercenaries. Azadin, looking at Ismail, thought that if he expressed his real intention, Mr. Puppy Eyes would start to whine. In the distance, cries of joy were heard as people announced the arrival of the Holy Guard of the Royal Church, confident that they were now saved. Azadin noted that the Knights of the Church would deal with the spider threat and decided to leave. However, from behind, a desperate cry was heard from the bastard, begging to be taken with him. He explained that once the Royal Church's investigation began, his death was certain, and he asked to at least take him to a place where there are no holy knights. The bastard reminded Azadin of his own words about the contractor needing sincere help. Azadin fell silent, thought for a second, and then smiled. A little later, the bastard, having barely reached the house, began loudly demanding a place to stay for the night, frightening the man and his wife, who looked at him with apprehension. His sharp tone left them puzzled. And Medium and Ismail were irritated, and they hastened to shut his mouth so as not to aggravate the situation. Azadin, dressed in knightly armor, stepped forward and politely explained to the host that they were traveling and looking for a place to spend the night, offering a silver coin as thanks. The man agreed, mentioning that they needed to go to work on the farm anyway. When they entered, the bastard asked with displeasure why he was being shut up and spoke disparagingly of the peasants, calling them lazy and prone to flight at the first difficulty. Azadin, opening the door, calmly remarked that perhaps poverty really does leave its mark. But he asked what was in the bastard's blood if he had ended up in their company. This question confused him, and he only blushed, unable to find an answer. Azadin warned him to think about what he said, calling him child of vice. He ordered that the goats be tied on the first floor and that they themselves be positioned on the second. They went up to the barn. Bastard began to complain about possible fleas or something worse. Azadin calmly noted that the worst was already sitting in his belly, straightening the hay for the bed. The bastard, continuing to grumble, declared that he wouldn't be able to sleep in such a place anyway. Medium approached Azadin and asked about the royal church. The people look as if they are both happy and scared by the appearance of the holy knights. He explained that the holy knights follow the 8 royal commandments, study white magic and protect people. So most greet them with joy, though with apprehension. The bastard was already snoring in the hay, and he was only surprised at how quickly he managed to fall asleep after complaining. Azadin, reflecting on the state of affairs, noted that many noble upstarts take from society much more than they return. Medium was surprised, but he suggested that they stop talking and take a rest. The girl agreed. Meanwhile, footsteps were heard in the forest not far from their overnight stay. A group of knights were moving with their leader. One of them asked Gardrick how much longer they had to comb the area. He replied that he also wanted to finish quickly, noting that some of the monsters had probably gone into hiding after the hunt began. Another knight suggested that they declare the cleanup complete so they could go back, have a drink, and go about their business. But then the conversation took an unpleasant turn. One of them mentioned that Gardrick's daughter was known to be a real beauty. The second one supported, but Gardrick himself abruptly cut them off, not wanting to continue the topic. The knights discussed Gardrick's daughter until one of them noted that they were probably younger than her. Another dismissively stated that it would not stop her from being captivated by their bravery. Gardrick cut off the chatter and told them to continue their search. Suddenly a roar was heard in the forest. One of the knights called out to the leader, but he gestured for him to remain silent. The sound was familiar, and looking into the bushes, Gardrick saw a wyvern. Her eyes glowed red. The knights immediately pulled back their bowstrings, and Gardrick managed to shout for them to stop, although the arrows had already been released. The monster rose into the air, attacking, and having come close, turned sharply and flew away. Gardrick noted with irritation that it was a young specimen, which meant there might be adults nearby. Soon one of the knights pointed to the farmland. A small fence and a vegetable garden were visible in the middle of the forest. And next to him is a woman holding her murdered husband in her arms with an arrow sticking out of his stomach. Gartrick came to the conclusion that these people were involved in the appearance of the wyvern and ordered their death. The knights were surprised, but fearing punishment, they obeyed and went on the attack. The woman looked at the knights with pleading and horror, but one of them had already raised his sword, deciding to finish her and her husband. Birds took flight from the trees, and the sky gradually became colored with the colors of the sunset. At this time, in the barn where the group was resting, an owl looked into the window and woke up Azadin. He stood up, noting with displeasure that he had only slept for 2 hours. His gaze slid over the surroundings and he heard a reminder. Duty calls. After all, he is one of the 108 spirits. The owl sitting on the hay reminded Azadin that only he who responds to the first call of justice is worthy of the title of its herald. He responded with irony, but broke off when he heard cries for help outside. A frightened boy ran into the barn, choking with tears and fear, and reported that his father had been killed by knights. In a clearing nearby, the bodies of the dead lay among the grass, pierced by spears. The knights checked the surrounding area. Gartrick asked if the child had been found, but received a negative answer. He noted grimly that he was only making their task more difficult, and thought that, according to the law, the murderer of an innocent citizen was subject to the death penalty. Formally, you can repent, but with Bishop Salasma, the chance of forgiveness is negligible. Usually, knights who have embarked on the path of repentance do not return. Some die on the streets, some become robbers. For him, at his age, this would be unacceptable, and for Maya, it would be unnecessary grief. Gartrick grew up enduring the ridicule and hardships that came with his illegitimate origins. He justified his actions by thinking that a father would do anything to protect his own child. He ordered to find and kill everyone who might remain alive, confident that no one would know about the death of the inhabitants of this remote village. While combing the forest, one of the knights noticed a girl running in the forest. The second raised his spear and threw it, but she stumbled and fell, avoiding the fatal blow. The knight noted with regret that his hand had slipped from the blood. They approached their victim, and one of them rudely addressed her, suggesting that she not complicate the situation. At that moment, a stone hit the knight in the face. He collapsed to the ground, stunned. The other knights turned around in surprise, but soon stones from the forest began flying at them too. Gartrick tried to figure out who was behind the attack. Azadin emerged from the shadows, looking tired and saying that his sleep had been interrupted. Gartrick barked angrily, asking if he was asking for trouble. The knights, without waiting for orders, rushed to attack. Azadin easily dodged the knights' attacks, noting that the spear gives the enemy a significant advantage in range, while he himself has no weapon. Deciding to change the situation, he picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at his opponent. Then, using the beauty of nature and the Kazasa method, he launched several stones into the air, which spun around and hit the knight straight in the head. Taking advantage of the moment, Azadin jumped up and delivered a powerful kick, sending the enemy flying. Upon landing, he snatched the spear from him, leaving the knight in complete shock. The second opponent was about to rush to help, but was stopped by Gartrick's commanding voice. The leader demanded that the fight be stopped, reminding them that they were holy knights of the royal church. Azadin coldly asked where such knights were killing innocent civilians, Vibras. Gartrick replied that the dead were apostates. Azadin, without looking away, demanded proof, pointing out that calling ordinary farmers who work from dawn to dusk enemies without reason is a crime. Gartrick noted that it was up to them to decide, and not for Azadin to doubt it. He himself was an apostate. The accusation was made. Gartrick took out his sword. It began to glow with a golden light. Azadin ordered everyone to close their eyes. It was the same light as the Margrave. Azadin held the woman behind his back, trying to protect her from the bright beam coming from Gartrick's sword. The light flickered as if alive, blinding and disorienting. Gartrick charged, swinging his sword. Gartrick stopped abruptly, feeling a searing pain in his shoulder. The arrow that Ismail had fired was accurate and unexpected. Gartrick roared in anger. Ismail, not giving his enemy a chance to catch his breath, was already drawing his bow, preparing for the next shot. Gartrick was surprised when Ismail and Medium approached Azadin. Medium asked how things were with his eyes, which puzzled Ismail. How could one ask such a question to a man without eyes? Ismail said that on their way here they encountered 2 holy knights who attacked them, but they did not kill them. Medium asked if this should be considered a success. Azadin agreed, describing the situation as excellent work. Gartrek, listening to them, thought with disbelief that he would not believe that these small fry could cope with two trained knights. Hearing the conversation, he turned to Azadin, assuming that he was Gerald. The knights took the name in surprise, and Gartrek scornfully called them soulless apostates, believing that the villagers were heretics. Azadin, not hiding his challenge, asked Gartrek if he admitted that he had only guessed when he gave the order to deal with them. Gartrek thought for a moment and fell silent. Azadin assumed that, judging by the knights' spears, they were simply hunting in these areas and then accidentally killed someone. Having mistaken the herbalist or mushroom picker for game, they decided to kill all the locals in order to cover up the incident. Gartrek, irritated and outraged, ordered Azadin to be silent, calling him a heartless apostate. Azadin demanded an oath to pay compensation to the villagers and to go ask for knightly repentance, promising to spare them in exchange. Gartrek was puzzled, asking why this was so. He noticed that Azadin looked like a herald of high rank. Suddenly, a golden glowing fire appeared behind Gartrek, and a huge golden hammer with a cross appeared above him. Gartrek promised that if he caught Azadin, the rest of the questions would disappear by themselves. Azadin, without hiding his smile, asked if he really looked like a high-ranking person. Gartrek, remaining serious, pointed the hammer at Azadin and tried to deliver a fatal blow with all his might. Azadin threw the spear at the hammer, but the spear shattered into small pieces. Soon Azadin jumped back, dodging the blow, and Medium and Ismail were thrown back by the blast wave. Azadin took the arrows from Medium, intending to use them. The hammer continued to aim at him, but Azadin deftly avoided the blows, noting the strength of the enemy's weapon. Landing, he picked up his sword, placed 2 arrows on his bow, and pulled back the string, releasing the arrows upward. Gartrek laughed and asked sarcastically if Azadin had forgotten how to aim. Gartrek rushed forward, swinging his sword, but the blow only hit the ground. Azadin suddenly disappeared right in front of him. Gartrek was dumbfounded, trying to figure out where the enemy had gone. Meanwhile, Azadin appeared behind the enemy, pulled the bowstring, and released an arrow, which accurately pierced Gartrek's head. Medium was shocked by what was happening and asked how this was possible. Suddenly, the arrow changed direction and returned back to Azadin, who deftly caught it in flight. Azadin explained that this was a technique called the boomerang arrow. The day was bright, the sun mercilessly shining on the field where Azadin carried the body of a man with an arrow pierced through his stomach. The children standing nearby screamed in horror and grief about their lost parents, tears rolling down their cheeks. Azadin turned around. 2 knights were tied up behind him. He asked what to do next, but the knights remained silent. Azadin offered them to repent and pay compensation to the children or face death. The knights, seeing no other way out, agreed to repent. 2 peasants and a woman with a scythe emerged from behind Azadin. The old man stated that the knights had killed his son, turning to them with anger and pain. The woman, not holding back her rage, added that they had been faithful servants of the royal church, even during famine droughts. One of the knights tried to put them in their place, reminding them of the sanctity of his service and threatening them with a curse. But he was not allowed to finish speaking. The woman hit him with a scythe. The second knight froze in horror as the woman held the sharp scythe to his throat. She stated that the curse was already upon them because people like them roamed the earth. Her blow was swift and blood spilled onto the ground. Azadin thought that the royal law would no longer protect these people after the murder of the holy knights. They would have to leave these lands and wander in exile. Children and parents cried, hugging each other, realizing the gravity of what was happening. Azadin noted to himself, is full of suffering. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, and Azadin stood near the grave, praying in front of a simple wooden cross. He hoped that at least the dead would not rise again as living dead. Medium wondered if it was really right to bury the holy knights of the royal church with the prayers of the Order of Salvation. In a conversation with Ismail, he asked whether he could truly forgive the knights if they chose the path of knightly repentance. The rules for joining the Herald clan contain an important statement. If a promise is made even to a stone by the road, breaking it is considered a sin. By imperial law, any voiced request must be respected and fulfilled. However, the Aragos are soulless creatures, and therefore are equated with stones, for whom any serious agreements are meaningless. Even the most dishonorable crimes can be forgiven if the victim belongs to the Herald clan. Therefore, even if the Holy Knights had sworn an oath to Azadin to become knights in exile, it remains doubtful whether they could actually keep their word. Azadin reasoned that the law of Vibrizes is not just rules, but principles that they follow. He acknowledged that if the knights had sworn and not kept their word, then the dead would not have found peace. For him, survival was more important than revenge, because he left behind children bound by the bitterness of loss. But now they are forced to live in constant motion, like nomads. Medium asked, "So, all this is for the sake of the farmers?" Ismail thought about it, noticing that Azadin did not really want to kill the Holy Knights. Azadin was experiencing an internal conflict. He did not like to finish off a defeated enemy, although if his strength was not enough, the situation would be different. Ismail, watching Azadin, thought about how he was always confident in himself, even when facing the Holy Knights of the Royal Church. Azadin then noticed that Porok's child was missing, and Medium reported that she saw him run away. At that moment, a rustling sound was heard from the bushes, and the bastard appeared from there, making his presence known. Azadin turned to him in surprise. The mountain towered above the treetops, and the day of running was slowly drawing to an end. The bastard was tired and wondered when he would finally be able to have a proper rest. Midya, noticing his tiredness, asked what he had done yesterday that he was so exhausted. Suddenly, a scream came from behind. The farmer's little girl was screaming in despair, blaming them for the family's troubles. The woman tried to calm her down, explaining that she was just a child and should not be blamed. The girl, sobbing, clung to the woman, calling her mommy. Azadin approached the farmer and asked where they were going. The man replied that they were planning to move to relatives in the southwest. The farmer explained that they would temporarily take refuge with relatives and think about the future for the children. Azadin noted that southwest is the exact opposite direction from Salazma. The man added that the drought was getting worse, and it was now pointless to stay on the farm. Then the paths of Azadin and the farmers diverged, and he decided to continue on his way. Before leaving, the farmer wished Azadin the blessing of Emperor Gerald. Azadin smiled, and the boy standing next to him noted with doubt that the emperor's blessing was more of a curse. "After all, my uncle himself asked me never to mention the emperor," on Azadin's shoulder, and complained that people were increasingly using her name as a curse. Despite her efforts to bring civilization and wisdom, Azadin admitted that a more thoughtful plan should have been made, and Owl acknowledged this in return. The owl reminded that even one generation of peace is already of great value, and the clan of the god Yagas is famous for its longevity. Azadin agreed with this, and together they walked away from the farmers who were watching them. The farmer, having gathered himself, said that it was time to move on, and the woman confirmed that they had to live and continue on their way. Azadin, together with Medium, Ismail, and Bastard, reached the foothills. The bastard spoke enthusiastically about how Azadin had crushed the holy knights of the royal church in one fell swoop. Medium noted that he could not see anything from his hiding place. By this he also irritated Azadin, who, blindfolded, sternly warned him about the inadmissibility of such conversations. You can't go around and chatter that he's killing holy knights, even hinting at extreme measures. Azadin considered the bastard a thorn, but he understood that he would have to put up with him for some time, until they find out the origin of the gold coins and who was behind the group of mercenaries. At that moment, a man with a cart approached them, a merchant from the Karazara Association, who offered the guests a cup of tea. Azadin and his crew sat down at the table, and the merchant served them a drink, asking questions about the night. Azadin replied that he was a customer with a gold coin, and there would be no leaks. The merchant asked where the newcomer, Gerald, was heading, and hearing the answer about Salazma, pretended that everything was fine. But he hinted at the need to hunt wyverns and bandits. Azadin asked the merchant for some sugar and wormwood snacks, promising to take on the business if he could get them, and held out his hand waiting. The goats drank water in the trading post while Azadin received food. After a hearty snack, he demanded details about the mission. The merchant explained that the Order of Salvation had settled right on their route, which actually collects donations from traders. The order uses the money of the rich to help refugees, and Azadin saw some logic and understanding in this. Although Medium doubted his sympathy, the merchant continued that many try to avoid the Knights of the Order, but bandits and wyverns await them on the bypass routes. He explained that most of these bandits were also refugees, and the Order itself was mainly busy searching for the mysterious book of the Divine King. As a result, the situation was confusing and complicated. Azadin, having listened to the merchant, noted that he usually did not interfere in the affairs of merchants. But this time I agreed to help. The task did not require killing, but on the contrary implied protecting people, which corresponded to his ideas about a noble cause. The merchant, smiling, called him a rare, unique specimen, which irritated Medium. She wearily admitted that she did not want to remain on the sidelines any longer, and approaching, she closed the merchant's mouth, threatening him. Her words sounded like a challenge as she clutched the knife in her hand. How dare a mere servant attack a herald? Asadin intervened, reminding her that although Medium belonged to the Edel clan and occupied a high position, the merchant was higher in rank than her. He ordered her to put the knife away if she was not going to go all the way. Medium obeyed and stepped aside. Asadin apologized to the merchant for the indecent scene, to which he waved it off. After this, Asadin called for them to gather and move toward the bandits and wyverns, and Medium responded with a short consent. The merchant watched them with apprehension, thinking that these two were clearly playing a strange game, one attacking, the other apologizing. It's as if this was all planned in advance. They moved along the forest path when Asadin, glancing at Medium, noted that he appreciated her support, but he warned that it was better not to mess with the Sabang family. He said that his predecessor had already been demoted for insulting the family. Medium just laughed, assuming he was worried about her. The bastard intervened in the conversation, noting that the Sabanga were one of the most influential families of the Gerald clan. He added that the clan itself seemed to be much more powerful than he had assumed, and then asked if they were his own people. Asadin immediately guessed his thoughts and warned him that if he was hoping for their help in obtaining the count's title, then he should forget about it. He explained that in the current state of affairs, Count Kozel, who was in the prime of life, was not even thinking about an heir. Considering the wealth and status of the bastard family, the count would only need to promise a title to receive a constant flow of money from them, staying in power as long as possible. The bastard, confused, asked if he could just sit back and do nothing. Asadin confirmed that this would be the best option, since they did not need any unnecessary conflicts with his relatives. Medium and Ismail supported his opinion without hesitation. Ismail reminded Asadin of the merchant's words, pointing the way to the goal. The tavern was very close. They stopped near a tree overlooking a small house. Asadin felt a slight lift. A familiar face, which he had not seen for a long time, was waiting for him ahead. Medium suspected that he wanted to see the girl and was slightly surprised. The sunset sky was ablaze with pink and gold hues. Goats grazed nearby, lazily picking at the grass. One of them, named Sweater, perked up joyfully at the sight of Asadin, and he warmly embraced the animal. Asadin was waiting with such trepidation to meet the goat. Medium was surprised to notice that the goat had been left in these places, and Ismail asked how it had ended up there. Asadin explained that the place of their previous meeting was too dry, so he asked the merchant guild to transport the animal here and look after it. They approached the house, and Asadin, opening the door, froze together with the bastard. Next to him were a man and a girl who exclaimed, "Brother," with joy and amazement. When Asadin asked who these people were, Bastard replied that they were distant relatives. When asked about competition, he shook his head. The man in the room, noticing Asadin, jokingly noted that his brother now had a companion and introduced himself as Kaka. The girl called herself Chica. Asadin nodded soberly and said that they were traveling pilgrims, and thanks to Sir Thorgy's protection, they were able to get here in safety. Kaka asked if his brother was now accompanying the pilgrims. Choka asked about the mercenaries he had been with before. The bastard responded gloomily that they had betrayed him, which caused genuine surprise in his brother and sister. Kaka invited everyone to the table, suggesting that they continue the conversation over dinner. The sunset was already giving way to night, and only a little food remained on the table. Choka, after listening to the story, was surprised at the trials her brother had gone through and asked where he was heading now. The bastard said that he was going to Salasma, and since the companions were going in the same direction, they were traveling together. Choka mentioned that there was a camp of the Order of Salvation on the direct route. Kaka thought for a moment. He noticed that Medium was too beautiful to be simply passed over. He warned that it was better to look for a roundabout way. Asadin responded by asking whether the followers of the three archangels could force someone who had clearly refused their offers, while calmly eating an apple. The brother and sister exchanged glances and noticed that he seemed to believe in ideals too much. The night was quiet. The full moon filled the surroundings with a soft light, and a warm glow came from the windows of the tavern. It was noisy inside. People were drinking beer, talking, laughing. Approached Asadin and asked if it was true that he was a pilgrim who was going to travel with their group. Kaka explained that these were their employers, traders who preferred to go through the forest rather than meet the Order of Salvation. The man boastfully noted that with them, Azadin would both dodge monsters and get to the right place, since some merchants were even paid for protection. He added that the more people in the squad, the higher the chance of scaring off predators, since most of them hunt alone. At the same time, the interlocutors complained that the new companion still behaved with restraint, as if he wanted to seem special. Azadin noted that he had done well to send Medium, Ismail, and Chica to bed so that they would not be drawn into this noisy conversation. The men decided they should get to know each other better and poured some beer. But Azadin politely refused, citing monastic principles, folding his hands in a prayerful gesture. This led to jokes that he, in his prime, spoke like a nun. The conversation quickly turned to his blindfold, and one of the men suggested that he couldn't see at all. Azadin replied that only a little, through the cracks. The curiosity of the interlocutors increased, and one of them tried to tear off the bandage. Despite Azadin's warning that the sight would be unpleasant, the situation was interrupted by Kaka, who called for Azadin to be left alone and to drink beer, reminding him that he had already been through a lot. The night in the tavern became increasingly rowdy and drunken. The men, emboldened by alcohol, decided to tease Azadin with questions. One of them asked if the children he was traveling with were his own, and then grinning he started talking about adopting Medium. Another one picked up the joke, hinting at proper upbringing as they understood it. Azadin calmly replied that the girl already had parents who were waiting for her at her destination. However, he noted with disgust that the faces of his interlocutors clearly showed completely different intentions. When the men realized that he was not rising to the bait, they tried to draw him back into conversation by pouring him beer. And having received consent, they moved on to another topic. They said that at the sawmill where the caravan was heading, they saw a girl from the Gerald clan. According to them, she is the illegitimate daughter of the wandering Gerald, whom the owner of the sawmill bought and keeps as a slave. The men cynically discussed her appearance, assuming that the royal church would not interfere, and they made dirty plans, even to the point of getting a child from her. These words burned Azadin. He slowly rose from the table, and the men noticed that steam was coming out of his nose. He covered his face with his hands and began to cry. At first, this caused only bewilderment and ridicule among those gathered, but his voice became angry. He exclaimed that it was a disgrace to see the Divine King's people stoop to such a level. When one of the men tried to put him down, calling it all jokes about a whore for money, Azadin rushed forward with fury. The blows were fast and powerful. The drinking companions flew to the sides. Stunned by the unexpected power, the question, where did he get such power, remained unanswered as the tavern filled with the hum of frozen witnesses of the scene. He began to speak about the three great saints who conjured with the power of white magic to observe the three virtues and sealed themselves inside the continent. And because of such deviations from virtue, the order of salvation is now losing its strength, but they still so easily succumb to sin. He cried out, "The era of Jupiter is coming. They must heed the three sacred commandments." When he ordered to abstain from adultery, lust, and prostitution, everyone realized that this idiot was drunk. The men began to insist on ending the get-together. They were leaving tomorrow and it was time for everyone to go to bed. Azadin got angry and said that he would get there himself and did not need help. The men complained about their spoiled mood and about the idiot who gave him the wine. As Azadin and Bastard walked down the hallway, Torge asked if it was all just a pretense. Harold confirmed. No one likes fanatics. Azadin entered the room where Medium and Ismail were sleeping peacefully, covering their heads with blankets. Medium, looking out from under the blanket, grinned, noticing that to those around him he looked more like a drunken brawler than a champion of virtue. She wasn't eavesdropping. It's just that his screams could be heard throughout the entire hotel. Ismail asked if it was all because the girl they mentioned was from the Herald clan. Azadin noted that he intends to figure it out himself and personally check whether the rumors about the girl at the sawmill are true. Medium asked what he was going to do if it turned out that the girl really was Gerald's heir. Azadin replied that everything would depend on the situation. Sometimes intervention requires decisive action. The morning brought the cold light of the sun, which slowly rose from behind the mountains, filling the peaks with a golden glow. The squad was about to move through the forest and one of the men warned, "If someone noticed a creature in the bushes, shout immediately." Azadin noted with surprise that there were more people in the escort than he expected. Medium winced as her sensitive nose caught the unpleasant smell. Azadin knew immediately that she was right. There was a stench in the air. Smelling of decay and echoes of black magic, the men of the squad seemed oblivious. He ordered Medium to stay with the mountain goat and took up arms. Soon a pack of wolves appeared directly ahead. But something was wrong. The creatures looked dead. Their bodies were mutilated, and in some places bloody strips of flesh were sticking out through the skin. These were revived, mutated wolves. The commander ordered the shields to be raised, and the warriors closed ranks, thrusting their spears forward. The wolves rushed with mad fury, their mouths open, and from them hung threads of thick saliva. But the attack slowed down. They were not rushing blindly, but judging by their movements, they were choosing a target. Asadin guessed. The creatures remembered something from their previous life and sought to strike at the weakest point, the rear. There, behind their backs, one of the wolves crept up to the two men and grabbed one of them by the arm. A cry of pain was heard. The bastard, without hesitation, lunged forward, drawing his sword. Steel flashed, and the wolf fell, spraying blood onto the ground. Azzadin noted that he wasn't that bad in combat. Medium chuckled, noting that the full armor on him was justified after all. Ismail nodded in agreement. Kaka ran up to the bastard and asked if he was hurt. The bastard waved him off, saying it was nothing. Kaka glanced at the wolves with irritation and noticed that all the creatures could do was yelp while staying out of reach of swords and spears. At that moment, one of the people shouted, pointing forward. In the distance among the trees, a figure appeared with a sword in his hands. Someone recognized Karim's silhouette and called out to him happily, asking what had happened to the others. But the commander was wary. The approaching man was clearly not who he was taken for. When he emerged from the shadows, everyone saw with horror. It was half a corpse, distorted and rotting. Cries of zombie rolled through the ranks. Someone panicked and remarked that at this rate they would soon be surrounded. On the orders of the commander, the warriors grabbed their bows and began to shoot arrows at the undead. Medium and Ismail watched this with grim tension. Azzadin sighed. He didn't want to interfere, but the situation demanded otherwise. Picking up several stones, he threw them at the nearest wolves, knocking them off their feet. Then he loudly announced that he would take charge of the dogs and ordered the others to deal with the zombies. The commander nodded briefly in response. The warriors switched to close combat, bringing down their swords on the undead. But the zombies continued to advance, feeling no pain. The metallic ringing of blows and the dull groans of the dead mingled in the roar. Choka deftly pierced the enemies with her spear, and the squad, albeit with difficulty, held the line for now. Azzadin thought, such coordinated attacks clearly indicate that a sorcerer is behind this. So he didn't think it would end there. An owl sitting nearby watched them with mysterious calm. The men began to express discontent and fear, admitting that they had not expected to face such dangers and were not prepared for these trials. They reminded that they were hired to fight only wyverns. The dead were dealt with, and the commander suggested simply continuing on their way without going into details of what was happening. But they refused, not knowing what other evil might appear on their path. However, when they tried to leave, it turned out that the path had disappeared, and the forest seemed to surround them. This caused confusion and anxiety among everyone, especially the detachment commander. Whoever organized the attack cut off their escape route and clearly wanted to destroy everyone. The men argued, blaming each other. Azzadin thought that if one of the men had actually harmed a woman of his clan, he had no desire to save his life. Azzadin understood that abandoning people to certain death was not the wisest idea. He turned to the bastard with a request to calm the people. At first he was surprised, doubting that anyone would listen to the pilgrim. But Azzadin reminded them that they wouldn't dare ignore an aristocrat. The bastard agreed and took on the role of leader. Addressing the crowd, he declared in a harsh and forceful tone that he was Targi, son of Margrave Castle, descendant of the Holy King, and that his life is more valuable than everyone else's. He called for further exploration of the site and condemned those who tried to flee, reminding them that their duty was to fight for it, which is a great honor for them, even if they are scum. After the speech, there was silence, and everyone present looked at the bastard with bewilderment. He himself considered himself the best. The forest was gloomy and unfriendly. Azzadin watching them. The bastard asked where the others had gone, but Azzadin evaded, shifting the responsibility to him. The conversation between them turned into irritation. One accused the other of ridiculous decisions, and Kaka, approaching the bastard, tried to calm the conflict. Tarj reminded them that it was dangerous to split up the squad. The bastard asked why the brother and sister did not follow the traitors, to which Choka explained that if the mage had cast a spell that distorted the return path, going back was even more risky. Azzadin noticed the bag in the girl's hands and realized that it was the powder of the Ptum shamans, a sign of powerful black magic. The girl assumed that the level of magic was too high, and the sorcerer was most likely already dead. Perhaps the lingering spirit continues to do evil, given the number of dead people around. Azadine confirmed her thoughts as he watched Kaka and Shoka, who proved to be quite useful in this situation. Medium guessed that the woman from the Gerald clan might have died too. But Azadin insisted that they didn't know for sure. Azadin explained that if the girl was truly from the Gerald clan, then she was born under a special blessing. The yellow bird, the winds, and the moon. This gives hope that she could master black magic and thus save her life. He added that if she was alive, there should be some traces left in the village by which she could be contacted. As their group emerged from the forest towards the wooden houses, Kaka noted a strange silence, and Choka suggested that perhaps the dead people they encountered were the entire population of the village. They walked past houses and someone was knocking on one of the locked doors. A voice came from behind the door, assuring that there was a living man inside, a holy knight of the royal church. Azadin pushed Choku aside and opened the door. The girl knight ran out of the house in horror, fell to the ground, got up, and ran into the forest. Choka shouted after her, warning her of the danger of going alone. But the girl only shouted that she needed to do something and that they should not follow her. Everyone was left confused as they watched her walk away into the darkness. Medium thought that it looked like the girl urgently needed to go to the toilet. The night girl apologized for the late introduction and thanked him for freeing her. Everyone around her noticed that it was as if a weight had been lifted from her. She identified herself as Maya, a representative of the Salasma Diocese, an elite division of the Royal Church. Azadin was surprised and wondered how such a high-ranking official ended up in such a position. Medium explained that the knight was locked in a warehouse where she couldn't even go to the toilet. May said that she was sent to this village on an important mission. While she was searching the warehouse for evidence, the village was attacked by monsters. When the screams were heard, the residents locked her inside, and she left the weapon on her horse, so they were unable to break down the door. She could use the magic of the sacred judgment, but it would put her at risk. She noted that the village was unusually quiet now. There were no residents, only dead people. Azadin added that they were traveling with a group of merchants and mercenaries who destroyed the dead, but refused to go further and turned back. May asked if they had met any other holy knights here. She said that the bishop had tasked her with dealing with the wyverns in the area, and that her father was training knights and apprentices, and they agreed to meet nearby. Azadin was surprised and asked if her father was really a holy knight. The girl confirmed. Their family has served the royal church for many generations, upholding its laws. Azadin thought that the village and the farmland they had recently passed through were connected by one road. It was highly likely that the knight he killed was May's father. He noted that the girl, who comes from a generation of service, has not yet realized that it is not worth bragging about. According to church rules, holy knights in the royal church are not allowed to have children. Azadine asked May if she still had her weapons, and she replied that all her belongings were still on her horse. He suggested that she look around and search for the horse together with his companions. Perhaps she would even find her comrades. The girl smiled and agreed. Azadin remained where he was, and entering the room, noted that there was nothing special here. Medium asked what they would do next. Azadin suggested settling here and trying to track down the black magician. If there is a person behind all this, then he is probably the one who needs to be found. Black magic outbursts are often caused by vengeful spirits, the souls of those who died in suffering and were not given peace through proper burial. Such spirits return to the world of the living to take revenge for their pain and injustice. If this is indeed the case, then what is happening is most likely related to a girl from the Gerald clan who was cruelly oppressed. If killed, she could be reborn as a vengeful spirit whose rage and power fueled the dark magic around her. Azadin clutched a stake in his hands as he sat with Medium on boxes near the fire. Ismail thought about making arrows, an incredible hassle, especially considering that the bow of the lunar crescent cannot be used. They had to hide their affiliation with the Gerald clan while they were among outsiders. Medium doubted whether such crude imitations would be useful in battle, but Azadin assured that the metal tips would at least help somehow. When Medium asked if he was going to convince the mage if he was still alive, Azadin thought about it. He understood that there was a high probability that the magician was already dead and had become a vengeful spirit, but he did not rule out the possibility that he had mastered black magic during his life. Unhappy pasts and painful memories evoke sympathy, but pity doesn't mean you can trust someone who is already completely broken. Azzedin thought that it would be easier to take something new than to spend a long time trying to convince someone. However, when Medium suddenly said that she would respect him more if he decided to try to convince the girl, he appreciated her maturity and understanding. Despite her young age, she understood the importance of protecting people. But Ismail quickly interrupted this thought, expressing skepticism and irritation at the excessive mercy. There was no point in him keeping alive the one who had caused the black magic disaster. He even doubted Medium's concern. None of the clan elders had shown such gentleness towards Azzedin. In anger, he squeezed the poor goat's wool. Azzedin, looking at him, calmly said that he was not particularly worried about whether anyone respected him and would do it his own way. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Ismail with his irritation at Medium's arrogant disregard for his views. At night, the streets were covered in a thick, unusual fog. The girl knight stood next to the bastard, noting that in this haze she could sense the approach of something dangerous. The bastard noticed the creature getting closer. She glanced at the siblings and Azzedin, wondering who he really was. The behavior and ability to organize a defensive formation did not at all resemble an ordinary pilgrim, but rather an experienced warrior. Moreover, in her opinion, such tasks are usually carried out by the Order of Holy Knights. Medium reminded him with a cold smile that trained people don't have to be rescued from locked warehouses, hinting at her recent capture. The girl knight was angry, but was forced to admit that she was right. Soon the silence was broken by the sound of a blade. The bastard drew his sword. A pack of zombies with glowing red eyes were approaching from the darkness, growling as they approached. The wyvern, watching this, chuckled, calling humans funny. A wyvern appeared above them, flapping its wings and hovering in the air. Her words confirmed the worst suspicions. It was she who destroyed the village. Azzedin asked if she was from the Gerald clan, to which the wyvern replied in the affirmative, explaining that she had been turned into a slave and taken away simply because of the blood of the heralds that flowed through her veins. The wyvern soared through the air, its wings cutting through the fog with a loud noise. Azzedin asked if she was still alive, and the wyvern defiantly replied yes. He noted that most vengeful spirits mistakenly believed themselves to be alive. He wondered where she got such power from. Kaka, from the side, just shook his head, thinking that the conversation was going on too long. And Choka noted that the introduction had long since degenerated into an unnecessary verbal altercation. The wyvern, irritated by the questions, refused to explain anything. With cold contempt, she offered to bow before the strongest and join her army of the dead. The wyvern soared into the sky and disappeared into the fog. Azzedin shouted after her that they had nothing to do with those who had harmed her. At this time, Medium looked out from behind the gate and hurried towards him. She asked if they were going to tell the wyvern that they themselves belonged to the Herald clan. But there was a problem. How would they then explain this to Targi and the other holy knights? Azzedin thought about it, and Ismail, who appeared on the roof, abruptly suggested simply killing the witnesses. Azzedin noted that he had been waiting for this question for a long time, and he emphasized that one cannot thoughtlessly take lives, even if we are talking about the holy knights of the royal church. Ismail exclaimed irritably that he was tired of listening to endless speeches. Medium asked what the plan was then. Azzedin replied that since the wyvern itself suggested solving everything by force, then they would show her what they were capable of. Clutching the arrow in his hand, he pulled the bowstring and released the arrow forward. Siblings Kaka and Choka watched in amazement as the arrow glowed and slammed straight into the zombie knight, sending him flying back. Azzedin said calmly who was really strong here. The battle raged. People fought with zombies, but the undead kept coming, gradually closing the ring. Azzedin, taking up a position on the roof, fired arrow after arrow, aiming at the most dangerous opponents. Medium and Ismail watched him, noting that he didn't even try to hide his affiliation with the Gerald clan. The crescent bow in his hands was clearly superior in power to ordinary weapons. They recalled that Azzedin had been accepted into the heralds without ceremony, and that only 3 months had passed since then. The bastard with the shield shouted commands, covering his allies. The girl knight screamed with tension, repelling the onslaught. Azzedin watched their resilience with amazement, and Medium was amazed at how the elders managed to train Azzedin to such a level. The wyvern hovered over the battlefield, watching as Azzedin fired arrows relentlessly at the zombies. Medium fought in the thick of the fray, while Kaka and Choka were already involved in the battle. Ismail noticed that Azzedin was using a crescent bow, but Medium just waved it off, confident that in the chaos of battle, no one would notice. And with a well-aimed shot, she pierced the skull of another monster. Mace struck at enemies with a mace, Choka stabbed with a spear, and Kaka delivered precise blows to the zombies' heads. Asadin, pointing to the battlefield, asked Wyvern who was the strongest here. She just smirked, calling him an upstart who imagined himself to be all-powerful after a couple of successful shots, and spread her wings in the sky. Below, the fighters became wary. A giant zombie bear emerged from the forest and was joined by a horde of undead. Bastard and Maya screamed in horror. The wyvern began its summoning spell, and soon other dragons appeared next to it. She admitted that she had been holding back for nothing and decided to release the entire army of the dead at once. The bear, immune to arrows, continued to advance, not even reacting to a blow to the forehead. Asadin noted with irritation that this was already looking like pure cheating. The wyvern slammed its tail into the roof where Asadin had been standing just a second ago, but he managed to jump to the ground. Medium, noticing his return, warned about the breakthrough of the defense. Zombie bears were already breaking into the depths of the formation. The bastard found himself in the path of one of the giants. The bear rose up on his hind legs, roaring so loudly that the earth shook, and brought down his paw and claws. The bastard barely managed to roll away but fell, coughing up blood. The zombies closed in on him. Maya, realizing that he was doomed, in desperation called upon divine power. A golden hammer appeared in the air, performing divine judgment. The blow was so strong that it covered both the enemies and the bastard himself. The smoke cleared. Maya lay without strength. The bodies of zombies and the motionless bastard lay nearby. Asadin, sarcastically noting that the knight could not distinguish between his own and others, only caused Wyvern to laugh. She, jubilantly, announced that she still had a lot of dead people and mockingly promised to finish them all off. Medium fired a volley, challenging the enemy. Asadin interrupted her, stating that she did not understand the true strength of their clan. This stung Wyvern, her eyes widening in rage. But before she could respond, Asadin's arrow pierced her wing. The dragoness screamed in pain and collapsed to the ground. He continued his attack, firing arrows one after another, so fast that while the first one was flying, the second one was already hitting its target, piercing the wings of the remaining wyverns. The wyvern, lying on the ground with a broken wing, looked at Asadin in mute shock. His words sounded like a death sentence, not to the body, but to its very pride. He stood over her and reminded her that under the Emperor's orders, their clan had managed to defeat the Divine King himself, and that the name Heralds is just a nickname for commoners. Inside the clan, they called themselves Aragus. The wyvern barely managed to get the words out, trying to comprehend what she had heard. Asadin introduced himself calmly. Imperial Herald, number 108. The silence around them was heavier than the noise of battle. Even the remaining zombies seemed frozen, waiting for what would happen next. Asadin stood over Wyvern, looking at her with bewilderment, blood flowing from her mouth. She said she waited 10,000 nights, hoping that the Geralts would come and rid her of the nightmare. But no one came. Her body was decaying, her soul was consumed by the magic of darkness, and she wanted to kill everyone to drown out her pain. Asadin felt sorry for her suffering and understood that she was not aware of her death. He asked about her children, but she replied that she hated them because they were the children of vile rapists. Asadin said that these children would be humiliated just like her. He urged her to retreat and said that he would vow to find and save them. The wyvern was hesitant, but Asadin was confident in his resolve. Asadin said that their clan had always done the impossible, and it would continue to do so. He did not fear the contempt of the Vibris people, for the faith of their clan had not lost its light. The others who were watching the conversation with Wyvern were surprised by this change. Ismail noted that Asadin spoke about faith, and Medium called it a white lie. Deep down, Medium doubted whether faith existed at all, considering it more of a curse that forced them to act. She thought that many had long ago abandoned honor, giving way to greed and the thirst for power. Even the founders were mired in it. Medium hoped that the restoration of the sacred scripture would help break this curse and restore the clan's lost supremacy. To respond to the vibrations in the same way, with cruelty and oppression. But she understood that it was a vicious circle, where the strong always humiliated the weak, and perhaps this promise was just another lie. Still, Asadin's words seemed surprisingly convincing to her. The wyvern remained silent and after a short pause came closer and declared that she surrendered, which surprised Ismail and Medium. Medium smiled. The girl began to tell how she once found herself chained to the wall. The baby was lying next to her, and the cold was penetrating her body. She was trembling and, looking at the child, she reached out to him with her hand. The child, crying from the cold, grabbed her little finger, and a bright light spread around. She began to cry, feeling the warmth, and pressed him to her heart, realizing that they were both alone in this world. Now she sat on the floor in front of Azadin, crying and asking him to save the children she could no longer hug. Medium was surprised that a dead man had fallen in front of her, and Ismail noticed how the black magic was dissipating. The dead fell to the ground, the trees began to blossom, and young green leaves pushed through the branches. Medium did not hide her surprise and wondered whether a person could really be saved by the power of persuasion. Azadin, kneeling before Wyvern, promised to fulfill her request and began to ask about the number of children and the place where they could be sold. The girl replied that she had some clues that she hid in the warehouse so as not to forget. When asked how she learned black magic, she told of a magic book that whispered to her, pretending to be a page from the Divine King's book. At that moment the words were heard, "Yellow bird, between the wind and the moon, the flame of the autumn field." Flames appeared on the floor and engulfed the girl. Azadin managed to catch her as she fell. The unexpected guest only laughed, calling him a fool. The girl said that this woman did not belong to their clan at all. She added that Azadin, not having any magic, never understood this. The girl and her squad approached while Azadin held Wyvern in his arms. She introduced herself as Calypso, the 106th herald of the clan, and explained that her goal was to exorcise the vengeful spirit and retrieve the page from the Book of the Divine King. Azadin objected that this was his area of responsibility, but Calypso doubted his actions, noting that he was not even capable of holding his own subordinates. He recognized familiar faces in those around him. It turned out that these were the same traders from the Khorazar Association whom Medium had intimidated at the station village. Azadin guessed that they had teamed up with Calypso to harm him. The wyvern, having lost its strength of spirit, turned into an ordinary corpse. Calypso stated that she did not have the mark of the yellow bird, which meant she was not an Aragus, and therefore it was not worth the effort. She pointed her staff at the body and a page appeared from it. However, instead of getting to her, she rushed towards Azadin. Calypso was surprised, but Azadin took the pages in his hands. The words of the spell sounded, "Yellow bird, between the wind and the moon, may rain." An arrow suddenly hit one of the pages, pinning it to a tree, stunning everyone present. It started to rain. Azadin held another page in his hands, and behind him stood Medium with a drawn bow. Calypso, noticing this, called him an upstart. Medium suggested that the page only acknowledged the true owner, noting how delicate this matter was. She replied that it was, after all, the king's sacred artifact, and warned the Aragus not to burn the emperor's lands without reason. She also rebuked Calypso for using fire in the forest during a severe drought. Calypso told her to be quiet and asked if she understood who she had dared to open her mouth to. She then stated that she was a Gerald, and that Medium was only an apprentice, and that her Edel origin did not give her the right to command her. Medium responded by calling them pathetic and narrow-minded bastards. Azadin, hearing the name Calypso, remembered her, and noted that she was from the batch that arrived immediately after his. Calypso asked what of it. Azadin asked if she had a problem with the way he trained his subordinates, calling her junior. Calypso laughed and replied that she was her senior. Azadin noted that he had become a herald earlier. Ismail called their squabble a dispute between old men. Azadin said that something else was more important now, and asked if the deceased had spoken about her children. Calypso was surprised that he was still worried about it, and said that it was Vibras's spawn, not Aragus's. Azadin countered that she was the real Aragasa, reminding her that she had suffered 10,000 nights because of her clan affiliation, and that by abandoning a clanmate who had survived all this alone, they would tarnish the honor of Aragus. Median believed that Azadin's words were not hypocrisy or falsehood, but a sincere belief in the honor of the clan. It didn't matter to him whether it was an Aragus or a Vibrissa, he truly followed his principles. To stick to one's truth, even in times like these, seemed to her a noble form of beauty. Calypso and her crew laughed, finding it odd that they thought the clan's most despicable fool was talking about honor. Calypso challenged Azadin to a duel, wagering a page from the Divine King's book that he had received, and Median, his apprentice. In exchange, she offered her rank and promised to tell about the children of the dead woman. When Azadin asked what Adal had to do with it, Calypso replied that she wanted to take her for herself to teach her respect for her elders and the honor of serving the clan. Azadin looked at Median, who was angry, and stroking her head, refused the challenge. He stated that the pages had already recognized him as the true owner, and there was no point in this fight, and that he would find the necessary information himself. Calypso sighed, and her partners looked at Azadin in surprise. She called him a stubborn ram and wondered what to do next, to which her comrades suggested simply abandoning the page. Calypso, furious at the refusal, proposed a new condition. If she lost, she would take up the search for the deceased woman's children herself. He would rescue them from slavery and take them to the temple's sanctuary. Azadin was interested, but added a requirement that she not only save them, but she also protected them, raising them as true Aragus. Calypso agreed and suggested that they duel according to tradition, to move apart by 100 steps. Azadin rejected this, suggesting that they start right there. Calypso agreed, but at that moment she received a powerful blow to the face, from which she fell to the ground and blood flowed from her head. Her partners stared at her in confusion. Azadin, standing over her, declared that that was all, and reminded her of the need to keep her word. Calypso was moaning on the ground. Azadin ordered the wounded to be checked, and Median and the others ran to carry out the order. People were surprised. After all, he was out of reach of his fist. Calypso's teammates assumed he had used a hidden weapon, wondering when he had managed to do so. Azadin, bending over the lying Calypso, demanded confirmation that she would keep her word. One of her men objected that a surprise attack didn't count. Azadin replied that he simply felt sorry for her, so he attacked unexpectedly, and in a face-to-face fight he could have broken her head. The warriors, amazed by his words, assured him that they would ensure that the promise was fulfilled, to which Azadin replied that he was counting on them. The sun was shining through the treetops. The ground was littered with corpses from yesterday's battle. Azadin stood over the bastard lying on the ground. He found no bleeding or fractures and noted that he was fine. Turning to the guards, he ordered them to help him carry him into the cart. Median approached Azadin and asked if he knew anything about medicine. He replied that not really, it's hard to see from afar, but up close everything is obvious, and with experience you can even see the bones inside. The warriors, talking behind his back, wondered what he meant. The victims were Kaka and Chaco, who were injured in a fight with a bear. They were wearing light armor, but the injuries were still serious. Maya had no external injuries, but she could have experienced mental shock after striking her own people. Ismail voiced doubts about whether they should be left alive at all, but Azadin insisted. Ismail called him a stubborn ram to himself. Median called Azadin and Ismail, saying that it was time to set off. The carriage moved off. Median, looking out the window, reflected on the strange events of the last few days. Black magic disaster, pages of the Book of the Divine King, appearance of cultists. All this seemed to her like harbingers of the great chaos, which might have already begun. Calypso woke up and jumped up abruptly, shouting something. The warrior next to her asked in surprise if she had come to her senses. Her gaze expressed anger and confusion. Azadin entered the room, holding out a wooden chest, and reminded that it was time to keep the promise. Calypso recognized the dead woman's belongings. The chest contained an umbilical cord wrapped in cloth with the children's birth dates, and the names of the traders who bought them. There were also clues stored there that could be used to find these people. Azadin suggested dividing the search. He would take care of other regions, and Calypso would take care of Salasma. She assured him that, as Gerald, she would keep her word, and noted that he was now senior to her in rank. Calypso then asked what exactly he did during the duel, since she didn't think he could use the Yellowbird's blessing. Calypso asked if Elder Kazas was behind all of this, but Azadin brushed it off, saying it was unimportant and that he did not intend to reveal the details. He merely noted that when the time came, the Elder would intervene personally. Then Azadin asked where she got the staff. She explained that she had taken the staff from a cultist who had been roaming her territory. What made Azadin think about mass production of such items? Calypso decided to hurry with the task and left. And Azadin, taking a deep breath, looked at his companions, Median and Ismail. And the warriors? They were all already asleep, as was his favorite goat. He smiled and, feeling tired, sat down on the floor, thinking that he himself would not mind taking a little nap. The carriage continued moving along the road. At the halt, the goat calmly ate hay. Along the way, they stopped to feed the animals. Maya, sipping tea, noted that they had defeated all the dead. The warriors, in turn, emphasized that much was achieved thanks to the mercenaries, and Azadin's group also made a significant contribution. After the body was removed from the old tree, the black magic began to dissipate. This was confirmed by looking at Azadin. Maya felt relieved, and Azadin thought how good it was that they had come up with a legend in advance. When brother and sister Kaka and Choka were asked about their future plans, Kaka replied that they were going to stop at the nearest tavern to treat their wounds and go to the guild to report. Kaka also asked Maya if she was planning to return to the Salasma diocese. Maya was at a loss, admitting that she could not return yet as she needed to find her father. Azadine insisted that she set out immediately. Maya agreed, deciding it was time to act, and said goodbye. Expressing hope for a future meeting, Azadan watched her go and wished that the blessing of the archangels would illuminate her path. When Maya left, Median asked Azadan, with some mockery, if he was worried about the nidus. He replied that it was not that, but rather that he had not heard any news from the emperor since the morning, which had upset him. Everyone began to get ready for the journey. The man was putting out the fire, and the others were loading the luggage into the carriage. Suddenly, an insistent voice was heard demanding that one of the horses be given to him. The warrior objected that this horse was intended for a special delivery. However, the bastard, who called himself the descendant of the great divine king, did not give in. Azadun noted with irony that it seemed he had completely forgotten how to walk, and Ismail added that this was real aristocracy. At this point, Kaka asked Azadun for a moment, noting that he was not quite an ordinary pilgrim. He admitted that his sister can read destinies and predict the near future. Azadun wondered if the talented brother and sister were trying to commit fraud. Then Choka, Kaka's sister, predicted to Azadun that in the near future he would become a great knight, and perhaps already was one. Azadin, with a slight grin, took this as recognition of his title as Imperial Herald, and he thanked her for the kind words, bowing. Choka said goodbye, promising to meet again. Light clouds floated slowly across the sky, and the eagle soared high in the sky. Azadin looked up thoughtfully, wondering where that stupid bird could have disappeared to. Ismail noticed that the goats were almost exhausted, but Azadin remained silent. The dryness around was oppressive, and it was necessary to quickly find a source of water. Bastard recalled that when he first arrived here, the situation was not so bad. They headed towards the spring where crayfish and fish were swimming. Asadin immediately realized that the animal could be poisoned if it drank water from here, and warned the others. The locals, not paying attention to them, began to catch crayfish and fish, assuring them that at least this way they would be able to eat, since there would soon be no fish left here anyway. Median agreed, and Azadin nodded in response. Ismail suggested that if the river had not yet dried up completely, then there might be normal water left in the wells. Azadin added that this would require permission from local residents. The bastard wondered why they needed to ask permission at all. Feeling like a noble aristocrat, he moved forward and loudly addressed the residents, declaring his desire to use the well. Azadin looked at this with a slight hint of doubt, and Median decided that Bastard would have to explain thoroughly who was in charge here. Finally, Azadin, holding a cane in his hands, approached the locals and sat down next to them. Ismail commented with disdain on the latest blind pilgrim's tricks, but Median, smiling, noted that such techniques really do work. Azadin smiled, turning to the people. Ismail thought that the heralds usually didn't get along with the Vibrous people, but Azadin was an exception. And the problem is that Median is gradually beginning to succumb to his influence. Azadin, pretending not to see anything, stretched out his hands forward, and Median hurried to approach him, helping him in the game. Ismail hoped that he himself would not succumb to this influence. Over time, a calm atmosphere reigned in the village. People walked along the streets. Crayfish were cooked in large pots. Median and Ismail were sitting on a bench next to the kitchen, and Azadin was standing next to a cauldron of boiling crayfish. The cook offered them a plate, explaining that they would not have time to eat a lot of crayfish, and that they would not keep for long anyway. The cook thought that he could organize a lobster festival. Approaching Median and Ismail with a plate, Median asked what to do next, to which he replied that he intended to find the children of the dead girl, assuming that they might be somewhere nearby. Ismail asked what would happen next if the children were found. Azadin explained that they would not be able to carry them with them, so they would wait for the caravan of the Karazar Trade Association to send the children with them, and Calypso will take custody, as she promised. Ismail noted with obvious irritation that Azadin liked to make his life too difficult. At that moment, Bastard approached them and began to eat the crayfish without any embarrassment, leaving Isabel and Ismail in shock from the empty plate. Azadin was silent, watching this, and deep down he believed that, despite all the difficulties, the real Geralt should act exactly like this. He thought that if he continued to do his duty, the Emperor's lips would surely return. Meanwhile, in the forest, Calypso walked with two assistants. The men could not believe that she had actually lost to the 118th Herald. They reminded him of all the troubles he had to endure to obtain a staff capable of tracking pages, while the other heralds gained an advantage. The main goal was always exactly this: to gain an advantage and enter the clan of the founders of Sabang. They reminded Calypso that she wanted this herself and risked her life to get this far. Calypso admitted that she became a herald solely due to her talent, without the help of her parents. But now she is at a low rank, and this depresses her. She admitted defeat honestly. Then, hearing the men shouting behind her, she ordered them to watch the Corazar Trade Association from spreading rumors, especially about Azadin. When asked why, she answered with a smile, saying that she didn't want to be left looking like a fool. One of the men smiled while the other, clutching his face, expressed obvious confusion. Calypso walked forward humming a tune, when suddenly a voice called out, "Greetings, 106th Geralt Calypso." Calypso stopped in surprise and asked who it was. The voice replied that it was the eye of Ariel. Ariel's eye asked Calypso again, and she confirmed his words in response. One of the men asked something wrong, but Calypso sternly demanded silence. Deep down, she thought what she had heard was nonsense. The Emperor's eye was not just a spirit, and the magical link between all the heralds of the continent, subordinate only to the Emperor himself. How Ariel could recreate something like this remained a mystery. When Calypso asked the purpose of his appeal, the voice offered a deal that could not be refused. At that moment, a crow with a bright red eye on its chest appeared in front of her. In the village, one of the men shouting insisted that he did not know any children and demanded to be left alone, looking at Azadin and his companions. Azadin tried to clarify that the children were taken by the Telbran Guild, but the man repeated in a panic that he knew nothing. Median noticed that they were clearly avoiding the topic and expressed confidence that they were hiding something. Azadin agreed, recalling that, according to the girl's information, they are on the right track. The bastard rudely demanded to speak, essentially stating that one could not refuse to answer the descendant of the Divine King. The old man said that only one person traded with the Telebaron Guild, a baker, and pointed to a house with a chimney. Median noted that they were going in the right direction and suggested that they leave right away, which Azadin supported. He thought the girl was barely 8 years old and hoped she was not badly hurt, assuming she only does housework. The buyers had arrived, the man said, holding a whip in his bloody hands. He noticed Azadin and his companions in front of the door. The baker, his apron completely soaked in blood, asked them rudely what they wanted. There were children sitting on the floor behind him. Azadin, Median, Ismail, and Bastard were angry. The bastard said they were looking for someone. The baker grinned and addressed him as Sir Knight. Azadin handed over a paper with the description of a girl of about 8 years old. The baker asked why they were looking for her, to which Bastard sharply replied that it was none of his business. The baker noted that he was not particularly interested, but said that the girl had died because she had been weak since birth. After a cry of surprise, Bastard pointed to the children in the utility room and asked who they were. The baker replied that they were orphans whom he had taken in, fed, and given work, accompanying his words with a smile. The bastard noted the change in the baker's tone with mockery. Then Azadin asked about the girl's grave. The baker was surprised and called his question stupid. Azadin called out to Targi, which Bastard confirmed, and suddenly kicked the baker in the stomach. He fell, and the bastard grabbed him by the hair, bringing his face close to his. And he said that the girl's parents had made a deal with influential people, and they had come to get her back. He demanded to know the burial place. The frightened baker admitted that he had thrown the body into the river. Azadin was amazed. This confirmed that the baker was buying children for next to nothing and using them at his own discretion. And the dead are simply thrown into the river. In a world where death has become commonplace, such actions were not even considered something out of the ordinary. But admitting this out loud seemed monstrous. Ismail, smiling, asked Azadin what he intended to do, whether he would kill him. He reminded them that in that case the children would be left unattended, and asked whether it was worth saving everyone, even those who did not belong to their clan. The baker was trading with the Tabaran Guild, and handing over their goods to the Karazar Association would cause conflict between the trading groups. Ismail doubted that Karazar would be grateful for this. Azadin understood that despite the support of the heralds from the Karazar Trade Association, they were at heart just traders. Even at his personal request, they would not dare to take custody of children who did not belong to the clan if it could lead to conflict. Ismail, with a caustic smile, noted that everything should be decided with compassion and justice. and asked Azzadin to share his wisdom with the ignoramus. Azzadin asked in surprise if he had always been like this, to which Median replied that it usually didn't come to that. Azzadin himself thought that he was just an apprentice after all. He admitted that Ismail was thinking correctly. But returning to the essence of the matter, he suddenly lost his temper, swore and hit the baker in the face. Torge's anger was caused by the fact that his brother had sworn to protect these children, and now due to the baker's actions, that oath was becoming meaningless. Azzadin didn't understand when he managed to become brothers with the bastard. He, without losing confidence, suggested settling the rescued children in his mother's mansion. Servants were needed there anyway, and the conditions would be much better. Median did not hide her surprise and, with slight irony, noted that even horse manure sometimes brings benefits. Azzadin admitted that the situation had been resolved, and he was about to close the topic when the baker, writhing in pain, again began to beg for mercy. However, thanks to some tough persuasion, the deal and the transfer of the children were successful. The beaten baker handed over the property documents, and Azzadin and his companions only had to send a message to the Khorazar Association so that the children could be delivered to the Baroness's estate. As night fell, the carriage raced through the city streets. Two men nearby were carrying boxes and repairing a wheel, but noticing the approaching carriage, they turned around abruptly. A crowd appeared behind them. One of the men called out to Azzadin, who turned around and met the stranger's gaze with bewilderment. The man asked with a grin if he recognized them, reminding him that his seniors were especially kind to him. Median noted skeptically that they didn't look like the heralds at all. The second man, holding his sword at the ready, announced that Azzadin had been demoted and was no longer a herald. After that, he demanded that he calmly follow them. Azzadin froze in confusion. The two boys, without hesitation, declared that he must go with them immediately. He responded mockingly, asking if they had drunk too much mash. But they were serious. The order, they said, had come from above. One of them impatiently suggested grabbing him without further ado, confident that by bringing him, they themselves would receive the title of heralds. Azzadin frowned, trying to decide if this was worth drawing swords in the middle of a peaceful village. The answer was blunt and direct. He asked Ismail for a staff for a while, noting that the situation was ridiculously absurd, but promised to beat the whole truth out of them. One of the guys mockingly recalled how Azzadin cried after being beaten in the past. He coldly agreed, but added that he remembered something else. How they covered the upper part of his face and tried to kiss him because the lower part reminded them of Errol. These memories made him shudder. Median, Ismail, and Bastard grimaced in disgust. Azzadin exhaled and, looking at them, declared that the couple could use a good beating. One of the guys, angry, cursed in response, between Azzadin and the two opponents, which lasted only a moment before the boys rushed to attack. Confident of their victory, they bared their teeth and swung their swords, but Azzadin caught their blades with his bare hands without effort. One of the attackers cursed. The second stared in amazement at how easily he held the steel. At that moment, the space around him flashed with light, and the sword in his palm began to glow with a purple glow. Azzadin exhaled and said, "Yellow bird between the wind and the moon," instantly followed by a second call of the same style, the ancient technique of Kazas. The faces of the opponents were distorted with shock. The next moment, the blast wave from his technique threw them back like rag dolls. One of them groaned as he hit the ground, while the other, lying on his back, couldn't believe that Azzadin had just summoned a real wall of lightning. The attackers were amazed. Azzadin, who had never shown any ability for witchcraft before, now confidently wielded magic. His sword glowed with a purple light, and the power of his attacks was unexpected and destructive. Despite the opponent's attempts to attack again, a black glow appeared around them, and Azzadin quickly struck, throwing them back and causing severe pain. The ground beneath them cracked and crumbled into pieces from the force of the fall. Both attackers were suffering from injuries, wheezing and writhing in pain. They couldn't believe their eyes. The combination of spells was incredible, because everyone said that Azzadin did not possess magic. Azzadin explained that in such conditions one has to restrain oneself, and that is why the attackers are still alive. Then he offered to listen to the whole story. At this time, a raven appeared in the sky above Azzadin, the eye of the emperor. He sat down on a tree branch and reported that serious changes had taken place. Azzadin immediately understood where the emperor's voice had gone, but was surprised why he was communicating through an intermediary. Raven explained that the council had expelled Azzadin from its ranks and placed a service curse on him. This news shocked not only Azzadin, but also his companions Medyan and Ismail. The contract of service between the clans, the heralds, and the emperor is a harsh duty. If the clan leader and elders decide to apply a curse to someone, it is imposed as a punishment for breaking loyalty. It is a curse of doom to death, but before that, to conceive a descendant. The way in which this is achieved causes horror and incomprehension. Everyone listened attentively to the raven, who was sitting on the wall. Azadin learned that this curse of service had been placed on him, which is activated within a year. The essence of the curse is that he must bear the herald and then die like his father Acre. This caused indignation in the bastard. How can a man give birth to a child? Questions multiplied. Where would the mother or father come from? And in general, what kind of nonsense was this? Asadin could not understand why the emperor cursed him. Raven explained that the punishment was not ordered by the emperor personally, but by the first chieftain Harkania, but refused to say further. He had no right to reveal more. Asadin insisted, and the raven, albeit with apprehension, told about the voice of the emperor, magic that transmits information through an intermediary, and allows the artificial spirit to exist in this world. But the conversation with Azadin after the demotion seemed to devour Raven's very existence. The boys were surprised. The voice of the emperor broke the rules out of compassion for Azadin, just to talk to him. They wondered what Azadin had done to deserve such a fate. The bastards suggested that perhaps Azadin was the chosen one. Despite this, Azadin was aware of the cruel truth. He would have to give birth and die in a male body, something unnatural and terrible. He felt doomed and did not understand how anyone could admire his achievements when he had so little time left. One of the attackers reminded Azadin of the voice of the emperor and the will behind the curse, reproaching him for his insolence. Azadin, without hiding his despair, answered rudely that now he cared little about formalities and propriety. He found himself in a very difficult situation. The bastard, quietly whispering to Median, expressed doubts about whether such a curse was possible, to which Median replied that, apparently Azadin was born exactly like that. Azadin shouted, "He is a herald who works hard abroad, and now this curse has fallen on him. The reason for this is his twin sister Ariel, who killed Elder Kenahan, stole the pages of the Divine King's book, and escaped. This betrayal of Ariel caused a real shock to Azadin and explained the severity of his fate. Median was surprised to hear the word betrayed and asked where the curse came from. Ismail also expressed doubt. Azadin could not understand why he should be held responsible for Ariel's actions, since she had betrayed everyone. The attacker stated that since Ariel is a traitor, then Azadin is probably in cahoots with her. Azadin was outraged and showed the scars on his face, proving that it was she who hurt him. He explained that he had no benefit from her dealings. On the contrary, he suffered from her behavior and felt like an idiot because of the way she treated him. The attackers did not believe his words and claimed that he was only covering for Ariel, calling her the second Harkonia, the pride of the clan. In response, Azadin said that she was a real problem for him and always put him in a bad light, and he only suffered from her actions. Ismail, Median, and Bastard understood that Azadin was in a very difficult situation. He was being accused of someone else's crimes, and he was really in deep trouble. The guys said that how could they know, and that Azadin himself had pushed them into thinking about betrayal. He began to laugh nervously and, smiling, suggested that they start killing members of their clan, since they considered him a villain. He named 2 of them as his first target. However, they asked him to first approach the chief and elders, hoping that they might reconsider. But Azadin shouted in anger that in the entire history of the clan, the curse of service had taken the life of only one person, his father. He hit them in the face, accusing them of malicious intent. Morning came. The sun slowly broke through the mountaintops, illuminating a new day. The children sat in the carriage wrapped in a blanket, silently watching what was happening. Azadin knew that the only way to survive was to beg the elders to reconsider the decision to curse. The boys approved of this plan, recognizing it as wise. The traitors cautiously suggested faking their capture of Azadin to ease the situation. And Azadin, pointing an arrow at them, promised to punish them for old grievances, mentioning castration. The boys admitted their guilt and asked for mercy, explaining that they were worried about his safety. They reminded him that the clan had been ordered to take Azadin dead or alive, and that he shouldn't get into conflicts with every Gerald he met. Azadin replied that this was precisely why he was voluntarily heading to the regional leader from Salazma, and he would abandon anyone who tried to stop him. He made it a point to say that he was indifferent to anyone except his teacher and eldest. Azzadin asked the escorts to look after the children better. The boys promised to deliver them to the Baroness's castle safe and sound, and to report that the Emperor's eye was on his side. They noted that Azzadin seemed to be a model herald, if there ever was one. Otherwise, the Emperor's eye would not have risked it for him. As they left, they shouted that they would see each other again. Salasma is a town of 3,000 respectable houses surrounded by farmland. Prosperous for centuries thanks to rich deposits of copper ore. The Guardian Knight watched the group with suspicion. The bastard, riding on horseback, declared himself Targi, the son of Count Castle, and demanded that they give way. The matter was urgent. The guard, despite his doubts, let them go ahead, and everyone understood that they were already in Salazam. Median, Ismail, and Azzadin exchanged glances, surprised that everything happened so quickly. The bastard proudly declared that this time he had outdone himself. Azzadin noticed the men nearby. They were the henchmen of the Khorazar Trade Association, who apparently had already heard about the order to eliminate Azzadin. Their insolent looks and wary behavior enraged the bastard, and he loudly declared that no one dared to raise their eyes to the son of Count Cassel. The traitors rushed to justify themselves and apologize, doing so reluctantly, which did not go unnoticed. Azzadin noted with irony that the bastard had shown impressive acting skills, and thought that the dogs of Khorazar would not dare to interfere in this game. The bastard smiled, offering to shake more out of the merchants, saying that since luck was on his side, he could make some money. He noted that those guys were clearly well off, and it would be a good idea to start with them. Medium noted that he always wanted to get his hands on other people's things, and his smile agreed. Azzadin was silent, but he heard a girl shout the name Bargain from behind. The bastard recognized her as Buna and was surprised. The bastard greeted his sister and asked what she was doing there. Buna replied that it was a matter of trade. Her cart was filled with potatoes and corn. Then Buna asked about the fate of the mercenaries bastard had once joined. He admitted that things had not worked out for them. Buna told about the troubles of Kozel Sr. He lost all people and even dignity. The bastard was happy. He said that good deeds are rewarded, which means his ancestors favor him. Buna asked, so he is now alone. At that moment, as she was drawing her sword to strike, she was interrupted. A stone hit her weapon straight on. Enraged, she screamed, demanding to know who it was. Azzadin immediately realized that Buna had not come so close by chance. She was serious and clearly had her reasons. He noticed her distress, but suddenly 2 armored men with swords emerged from the shadows and quickly moved to attack. The bastard was in shock, not understanding what was happening. He was trying to figure out if Buna was going to kill him, to which she replied that it was easier this way. No need to search the whole world for mysterious pages whose location was unknown. The first attacker jumped and swung his sword. The bastard managed to cross swords with the enemy, entering into a fierce duel. He called out to Buna, trying to stop her and warn her that she was wrong in not understanding what he had become. He said that his brother was able to deal with opponents with one finger. Then Bastard called for Azzadin's help, demanding that he not stand aside. Azzadin calmly explained that he wanted to see what the bastard himself was capable of. Median, yawning, added that in such a situation, it would be better for Azzadin not to fuss. After all, he was under the curse of service, and someone else was growing in his belly. This confession horrified Azzadin. He screamed with anger and indignation, not understanding why Mediana was spreading such information. Meanwhile, the bastard continued to fight, and the tension grew. Azzadin tried to remain calm despite the internal tension. Mediana gently reminded him not to be nervous. It was bad for the child, which caused Azzadin to respond with irritation. At that moment, one of the attackers interrupted the argument by shouting and using magic against Azzadin. He ordered Median and Ismail to deal with the enemies, but not to kill them. Median and Ismail, although surprised, drew their swords, realizing that they had no choice. The attackers stood waiting for the fight to begin. The tension was palpable. Azzadin, meanwhile, encouraged his companions, calling on them to show off their skills. Ismail jumped deftly and struck the legs of one of the enemies, who became confused and cried out in pain. The injury was serious but not fatal. Azzadin assessed the fight, thinking that the young striker had a clear path to the heralds thanks to such skills. At this time, Bastard, sitting on his horse, lost control and fell, which left Azzadin irritated and perplexed. How could one so easily lose an advantage? One of the attackers took advantage of the moment and rushed with a sword at the fallen bastard. Azzadin realized that it was time to step in and protect him. Azadin watched as Buna, kneeling with her subordinates, screamed about cruelty, accusing him of chasing them like dogs and even pulling out her nails, despite the fact that she gave him everything, including carts of hay. He calmly replied that the punishment corresponded to the sins and reminded her that she was alive only because she had not killed anyone. But if she decides to sin again, the consequences will be obvious. Buna and her subordinates agreed and left. The bastard noted that trying to kill his brother for the sake of inheritance was the height of baseness, although he did not expect anything good from her. Azadin added that it seems that inheritance is of secondary importance here. Median noticed that he was having mood swings and reassured him that it would soon pass. To his surprise, she explained, as her mother says, physical and psychological difficulties are quite natural during pregnancy. Azadin clarified that the curse of service has nothing to do with a normal pregnancy, and therefore there will be no such symptoms. The conversation was interrupted by Ismail, who reminded them that last time Azadin had simply sold off the silver candlesticks that the mercenaries had stolen. And he asked what the point of this whole campaign to return what Buna had stolen was. Azadin explained that at that time he did not have the opportunity to figure it out himself. There were too many mercenaries. And besides candlesticks, there was mostly fittings there, useless for refugees. He noted that he was acting according to the situation and asked if there were any problems. Ismail remained silent. And then he admitted that he did not understand Azadin, considering him strange and odd. Even robbers and extortionists were easier to understand. Azadin added that he might have understood the gist a little, and Ismail asked in surprise if he had understood correctly. The conversation was abruptly interrupted by the bastard, who was sitting on a horse. He noticed the representatives of the Order of Salvation right ahead. Azadin perked up when he heard the name. The flag with the three-winged wheel of the Order of Salvation fluttered in the wind, and Azadin was clearly impressed. Medium, observing his reaction, admitted that she knew about his sympathy for the Order, but had no idea that it was so strong. Ismail, in turn, noted that, despite everything, they are still a people of Vibriz, whose reputation leaves much to be desired. Medium wondered whether she should share rumors about them with Azadin, or whether it would be better not to spoil the image of his idol. Ismail teased her for her unexpected delicacy, to which she replied that she simply did not want to stress the pregnant one more time. Azadin immediately intervened, noting that she was the main source of stress. Azadin reasoned that his demotion was more of a panic move on the part of the frightened elders than a conscious decision. He was confident that a meeting with the regional leader would help lift the curse. After all, in a short time of wandering, he managed to collect 2 pages of the Divine King's book and 3 gold coins, a result that, in his opinion, could be considered a record even by the standards of the heralds. This was a weighty argument. He doubted that they would kill him just for the pages. Even with his personal dislike for him, such a measure seemed excessive. Meanwhile, a line formed near the Order of Salvation tent. Ismail stacked logs and Bastard picked up stones, grumbling that for an aristocrat such black work was a clear humiliation. Median noticed that Azadin was nowhere to be seen, and Ismail explained that he had gone straight to the Order. When asked about a warm blanket, Median replied that she had managed to borrow one. Medium said that if she didn't return it, she would burn in hell or be reborn as Gerald. The bastard asked if it was true or a joke. Ismail approved of the motivation. Everyone turned around when Azadin returned with a loaf of bread with a sign on it. Medium was surprised, asking why Azadin went for free bread, since they had normal food. Azadin replied that he simply wanted to know what the Order of Salvation was distributing. He noted that the bread was not free, he paid for it. Medium was surprised that he paid the Order of Salvation. Azadin said that he even asked to put the company seal on a separate sheet, but the Order refused. Median explained that in the books the Order are heroes, but in reality they are dangerous to the heralds. Azadin replied that even punishment or death would not change his faith. He took a bite of the bread, which surprised everyone. Suddenly Azadin fell silent and looked thoughtfully at the loaf of bread. He couldn't bite into it. Food was being cooked on the fire in a cauldron along with loaves of bread. Medium was puzzled as to why bread was being thrown in there, since it had become unappetizing. Azadin said that the bread just needs to be boiled a little, then it will become edible. This bread was prepared by the Order of Salvation for the refugees, and Azadin took it out of curiosity. He couldn't throw it away now. Beggars approached them and asked for food in the name of the merciful Archangel. They had not eaten for 3 days. Azadin asked about the bread the Order was distributing and learned that it was only given to adults. Children were forced to join the Order, Bastard said. Azadin gave food to the beggars, which caused displeasure in the bastard. Azadin explained that he gave the bread to make amends since he is not a refugee. He promised to give the refugees some extra portions, and the girl was grateful. At that moment, people in robes appeared, surprised by the nobility and carelessness of Azadin. The man asked why Azadin was acting like this when the clan had declared a hunt for him. It was the regional head of Salasma. The one they were looking for came himself. The people from the clan were surprised by his behavior and asked him to show respect to Mr. Regional Head Salem. One of the men mentioned rumors that Azadin was beating up their people and had taken on apprentices, having fun with them. Azadin closed his eyes, preparing to speak. He thought that Salem was an elder from the Sabang clan and that Derek must have snitched on them. Salem slammed his staff on the ground and ordered the outsiders to be removed. Azadin remained silent and asked Targi to scare away the locals. The bastard shouted that the old man loved to eat children and threatened to make shashlik out of them. The children ran away in fear, and Ismail told the bastard to leave since he was also an outsider. Azadin remained in the tent. The music of the harp was playing. Salem explained that no one could hear their conversation. Azadin sat down at the table and noted that the reception was very noble. Salem threatened to kill Azadin right there and continued drinking tea. He noted that he could barely restrain himself, and if he had not been in a crowded place, he would have done the same. Azadin asked if they had any free time, since Ariel had started a conspiracy. Salem accused Azadin of conspiring with Ariel. Azadin responded that he was not on her side and asked to reconsider the demotion. Salem doubted and remembered that he and Ariel did not have a good relationship. He assumed it was a conspiracy, a cunning plan to deceive those around him. Azadin laughed. How could he help Ariel, working for the clan? Azadin noted that everyone looked down on him. Salem was silent, thinking about his humiliation. He asked why he should intercede for Azadin before the elders, even if he had nothing to do with it. Azadin replied that it was the right thing to do. The young clansman and herald would die on false charges, and the regional leader would simply look the other way. Salem said that Azadin is Ariel's blood brother, which complicates the situation. He added that reversing the decision would undermine the clan's authority. Salim stressed the importance of discipline and hierarchy. Azadin chuckled and asked if his demotion would save the clan's honor. He agreed not to resist on condition that the order to capture and kill him be revoked. Azadin demanded a written agreement to lift the curse within 6 months. Salim called Azadin an impudent cur. His word should be enough. Azadin insisted that one word was not enough, because his life was at stake. Salem ordered Azadin to shut up and stop criticizing the elder. He must have a sense of proportion. He thought about killing Azadin if he hadn't been hiding in a crowded place. Azadin agreed to continue the conversation outside. Salem challenged Azadin to a duel, declaring that he would not lose. Salem accused Azadin of insolence and shouted that he would finish him off with his own hands. Suddenly, a girl's voice was heard. The first Gerald Eldis appeared. Azadin greeted Lady Eldis. Salem bowed to her. Eldis demanded to stop. Everyone started staring at them. Salem asked what brought Eldis to this wilderness. She replied that she had come because of the rumors about Azadin's demotion. Eldis could not remain indifferent after learning about it. She drove without stopping as soon as she found out. Azadin noted that it was 3 days' journey to Aranj. Eldis handed Azadin a scroll and said she needed to speak with him. She sent a petition to the leader and vouched for Azadin. Eldis showed the official response with the signatures of the elders and the head of Hatir. They swore before the eye of the emperor to reverse the demotion within 6 months. Azadin thanked Eldis and smiled, admitting that he had caused trouble. Aldis said it was necessary. All these people were too stubborn and old-fashioned. She couldn't let them harm him without proof. Azadin replied that everything was fine. Medium watched them and was angry. She watched how sweetly they were communicating, and she did not like it. He spoke to her differently than he spoke to anyone else. Medium recalled Azadin's words to her. He said that apprentices were not needed and that they were free to return to the Holy Lands. Medium was angry. Anger was growing inside her. Azadin said that she was still a child but not a beauty, she recalled. Eldis, at this time, supported Azadin and criticized the elders with their traditions. Medium watched their conversation and thought about their relationship. Azadin was embarrassed and blushed. Eldis remembered the first time she met Azadin with Arael. She said she was full of worries then. Now Eldis saw how Azadin had grown. The first head of the Gerald clan in Harkonia deciphered the Divine King's magic book. With its help, the full potential of the Seclanans of the Gerald clan was revealed. The violet eyes became known as Harkonia's eyes in honor of the leader. Those with such eyes were revered as the reincarnation of Harkonia, the greatest of the heralds. Eldest, with purple eyes and Jita's blood, was recognized as the incarnation of Harkonia. Hatir, the current head of the Gerald clan, took Eldest as his apprentice. He called her the decipherer of the pages of the Divine King's book. Katir is the highest authority and leader of the Herald clan. However, one of the masters who helped decipher the pages stole them and died. Akri turned out to be a traitor, causing surprise and prayers among those around him. The crowd screamed curses as they looked at the man with two babies. The men in robes, sitting on boxes, approached the man. Katir was amazed that a mere explorer could hide from the heralds for a year. Eldest stood nearby, considering the loss significant, removed her hood and spoke of Acre's hidden potential. The children were born as a result of a curse. Eldest took the baby in her arms. The curse proved its effectiveness. The boy destroyed himself. Katir asked Eldest about the fate of the children. He suggested that the children could not be the reincarnation of Akri. Katir considered Akri a traitor and insisted on the destruction of his descendants. The curse usually results in one child, but here there were two. Eldest noticed the baby's missing eyes, which Hathir recognized as a bad sign. She refused to execute the child and hugged the baby. Eldest felt the baby's gaze, as if it saw everything without eyes. Hatir considered their fate terrible and thought it better for them to die now. Suddenly, one of the babies reached out to him, which surprised Katir. The second child had Harkonian eyes, purple, like Eldest. Eldest considered the babies helpless and insisted on taking them with her. Hatir thought about it and allowed her to do as she wished. He regretted the loss of the divine pages of the book and walked away. Even after taking in the children, Eldest risked insulting the shrine of Argos by accepting the offspring of a traitor. In the huge hall, many people gathered around a round table. They discussed the possibility of reviving the scripture of the divine king and children. Some of those present believed that the children should be killed to avoid the threat. Others had doubts but voted for harsh measures. Eldest was confused and tried to convince them of her point of view. Katir listened attentively and drank tea without interfering right away. Eldest wanted to name the children to give them a chance at salvation. She believed that the children were born with hatred for the clan, but names would help them. Hatir objected, slamming his fist on the table, calling it unacceptable. For Aragos, the name is sacred, and it will unite the fate of Eldest and the children. Katir reminded her of her status as the bearer of the eyes of Harkonia and the clan's heritage. He doubted that the sacrifices for these children were justified. Aldous admitted that she herself does not understand everything, but believes in the protection of life. Eldest admitted that Akar was her friend, and she partly understood the reasons for his betrayal. She could not bring herself to hate him, despite everything. Katir warned that such words should only be spoken in his presence. Otherwise, there would be serious consequences. Eldest agreed with the warning. Then Katir decided to name the children himself. The boy was named Azadin, the girl Ariel. Azadin is a symbol of the dragon of ruins and silence. Ariel is a symbol of the angel of light and darkness. Their names are an echo of the myth of ancient deities who destroyed each other. The children were named after these deities to whom the Aragos swore allegiance. Then the deities submitted to the Vibris people. 3 years later, little Ariel held a bow with purple eyes. She accurately shot an arrow at the target. Everyone around admired her talent. Katir noted her ability to calmly channel mana. Eldest called her art and mana incredible. Another man said she was the genius of the century. Harkonia's reincarnation acknowledges her power. Eldest believed that Ariel would become the greatest herald. Katir hinted that she was upset by the appearance of a rival. Eldest reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. Everyone looked at Azadin, who was crying and complaining about his stomach. The men were surprised by the difference between the twins. They said that Azadin did not have a grain of mana. Azadin ran away from the assembled group. Aldous suggested that the curse of service was not suitable for twins. It seemed like Ariel and Azadin were meant to be one. Azadin ran up to his sister and hugged her tightly. The pages in Azadin were incomplete, like pitiful remnants. The remnants scattered the mana inside, creating chaotic swirls. Mana of all kinds mixed, creating instability. Hatir protected him from the negative effects of mana. He probably won't be able to cast spells at all. Katir noticed the irony in Errol's choice. All the pages and eyes went to only one child. A hard lot fell to Azadin. Aragos was clearly superior to the Vibris people in strength. The appearance of a page from the Divine King's book changed the herald's goals. The clan began to thirst for power and combat superiority. The thirst for power distorted their views and caused blind adoration of the strong. The weak were oppressed and humiliated. Azadin was pushed and called names, causing pain and frustration. The guys laughed, he ran over him a little, and then he made a spectacle of himself here, and he still wets the bed. Errol watched from afar, silent but not caring. She didn't interfere, surprising the guys. Usually she would have already hit someone for approaching Azadin. Azadin was teased, saying that even his mother had turned her back on him. He denied this, calling her not his mother. The humiliations continued, increasing the feeling of loneliness. The sky was dark, but the last rays of the sun were still breaking through the rocks. Azadin was kneeling near the waterfall, his face stubbornly pressed to the ground, tears streaming down his cheeks. He felt such pain that it seemed like it would never end, and he couldn't find a place for himself. In despair, he asked himself why he had been given such a fate, and why exactly he had ended up like this. The heart was filled with an evil and excruciating pain, and it seemed ready not to withstand this tension. The moon was in the sky, softly illuminating the rocks around. The hand clung to the stone. As the woman slowly crawled up, carrying a heavy bag on her back, it was Aldous, struggling along the path, thinking about the gifts she had picked up and hoping that they would at least bring some joy to the children. Aldous climbed up the rock and looked around, admiring the beauty of the place and admitting that she hadn't walked like this for a long time. Suddenly, a mosquito landed on her hand. She smiled when she heard that her blood was of divine origin and that she shouldn't share it so generously with insects. Aldous responded with respect and agreement. Between the stars and the moon fluttered a yellow bird, a swallow sparrow using the magical power of Aldous. Suddenly she noticed that a child had fallen into the water, and in alarm she threw down the bag of gifts without thinking, rushing to save the child. She dove into the water and pulled out Azadin, holding him tightly to her and asking if he was okay. Azadin, although exhausted, called her by name and admitted that he was afraid that he would be kicked out, because they said that he would never become a real herald. Aldous, full of sympathy and concern, listened to him, trying to support and encourage him. Aldous decided that even if Gerald's path was closed to Azadin, there would be other useful work. She lit a fire and wrapped him in cloth to warm him up, as his body temperature had dropped significantly. Then she suggested spending the evening together looking at the stars. Azadin asked about the glowing dots in the sky. Aldous, smiling, told about the constellations in the book she had brought with fairy tales. She explained that when stars come together, they form legends, and gave the example of a myth about fairies who lived before the arrival of the divine race of Aegis. Until that night, the star-studded sky had been just an empty background for Azadin. But counting the stars near Aldous, he felt for the first time that they had become painfully desirable to him. Aldous smiled as she looked at Azadin. The Gerald clan held a solstice festival every other summer, when Geralds from all over the world gathered on the sacred land. Thanks to this, Azadin had the chance to spend time with Aldous every day. Ariel watched them from around the corner. Azadin came to return the book. The Knight's Guide to Salvation. Aldous served his favorite dish and asked him what he liked the most. He replied that it was a chapter on the three virtues: courage, wisdom, and compassion. It said that by following them, one could master the magic of light, the very one that belonged to the divine King Aegis. For Azadin, this seemed unbelievable. Azadin dreamed of using magic. He considered the Knights of Salvation something special, although many called them pompous rogues. Aldous asked him if he would like to become one of them. Azadin replied that he was Aragus, and that this people was hated by everyone. They say that hatred comes from their strength, but he was weak and only became a target for ridicule. Outside the clan, he would be despised simply for his origins, and even the Knight of Salvation would likely treat him with hostility. He remembered being told once that he was so ugly that he should wear a bag over his head. He tried it and nearly choked. Aldous asked if Azadin hated her. He was surprised and replied that he did not. She hugged him, saying that his self-hatred would sooner or later turn into hatred for her, for forcing him to live. This would deeply sadden her, because she is almost like a mother to him. Aldous recalled the words from the book about courage, wisdom, and compassion as the basis of the Knight of Salvation. She believed that he could develop these qualities in himself. Suddenly, one of the boys grabbed Azadin by the collar. Laughing, they rejoiced at Aldous' departure, accusing him of meanness and a desire to make his life easier. They surrounded him, threatening to kill him. The children never had time to touch Azzedine. They screamed in horror when Ariel suddenly appeared. She herself had seriously wounded him. Azzedine sat, holding his eyes. Ariel stood next to him, silently looking at him. A few hours ago, the guys parted to let Ariel through. She said that he was disgusting, pretending to be weak in order to draw all of Elda's attention to himself. Azzedine was sitting on the floor, clutching the book tightly to himself. Ariel snatched it and tore it in two. Azzedine screamed and reached out to stop her. She grabbed his hand and hit him in the face. The boys ran away in fear, looking around the corner. She reproached him for pretense and feelings for Eldis. Azzedine tried to object, but Ariel continued to press. She reminded that Eldis would always be young because of her divine blood. Only 12 years difference. Azzedine scratched the ground with his nails in rage, suppressing a scream. In his thoughts, he acknowledged that Eldis was his ideal and the meaning of life. He vowed never to defile this feeling with base desires. Ariel provoked him by talking about the strength and blood of the Eldis clan. She demanded that he become the strongest among the Aragas. Azzedine jumped up and tried to hit her. Ariel placed her hand on his shoulder and then swung her sword. The blade cut through the skin and blood spurted out. She looked at him coldly, calling it a gift. Ariel said that the scars would suit him and told him to thank her. Better that than incomprehensible flesh. A child's cry could be heard in the forest hut. A man in a cloak was approaching the building. Azzedine screamed, lying on the bed, and called for Ariel, not forgiving her. His eyes were bandaged. The voice mockingly called him an eyeless dragon and a formidable baby. The stranger asked if he could really see without eyes. Azzedine asked who it was. The elf introduced himself as Elder Kazaz, throwing off his hood. The boy, frightened, begged him not to eat him. The elf laughed, saying that he had long since given up eating human flesh. He declared that Azzedine would become his disciple. He was chosen for this. Kazaz touched him, mentioning that he would teach him the beauty of nature and the Kazaz style. Azzedine said that the elf is not Aragaz, and therefore training is pointless, because he does not possess magic. Kazos laughed and offered to reveal the secret of the magicians. You can kill without magic if you know where to strike. He said that Kazos' style would give power comparable to magic. Azzedine doubted it. At first he pretended to leave, but mentioned that he could give Azzedine a chance to break Ariel's nose. Azzedine, after thinking, asked to be taken as a student. The elf agreed. 10 years have passed. Eldis admitted that she was shocked when she learned about his apprenticeship. Azzedine described Kazaz as twisted and a bit insane, but tolerable and not feeding on humans. Eldis admitted that she couldn't sleep at night, afraid that he would eat it. Azzedine laughed, surprised that Eldis was afraid for him, since the teacher had rejected human flesh many years ago. He remembered Elf's words about sweet wormwood and wondered if it was Eldis herself who recommended him to the teacher. Eldis changed the subject and told that Ariel had killed Elder Kenahan and stolen the pages of the Divine King's book. She didn't understand the motives. After all, to gain the power of the pages, interpretation was needed, and Ariel could have received recognition if she had waited until the analysis was completed. Azzedine thought that his sister's motives remained unclear, but that did not change her betrayal. Salem said that Ariel was reckless and cruel, and her actions were impossible to predict because she had been like a forest fire since childhood. Not everyone acts based on logic, and Ariel is one of them. Azzedine, Eldis, and Salem came out of the tent. Ismail, noticing Eldis, the first Geralt, noted that Eldis seemed like a goddess. Medium asked if he was attracted to her, but Ismail explained that it was simply the divine blood of Egas that flowed through her. He recalled that Harkony and the Emperor had a child together, and now that blood flows in the veins of the Aragas. The medium mentioned Azzedine's face and asked if Ismail had understood something important. He thought about it, and he admitted that continuing to serve Azzedine could be dangerous. He explained that the Council of Elders would most likely try to punish Ariel through him, and although the order applied to the entire clan, for Azzedine this will be especially difficult. They will expect the maximum from him, even to the point that he will have to prove his innocence by killing his own sister. Ismail suggested that Ariel would not have gone to such lengths unless she had a way to avoid being demoted and cursed from service. When asked about Ariel's motives, he replied that she probably wanted to stop further deciphering of the Divine King's book. The media was surprised, but Ismail only added that perhaps she was continuing her father's work. The strength of the Herald clan was concentrated in the blood of the founders. Even if the book were deciphered, this order would remain unchanged. Perhaps Ariel, who was of low birth, sought to overturn the system using the Force. Ismail noted that Azadin could well go over to her side. The media was surprised. But Ismail explained that Ariel was probably already recruiting supporters for his idea, despite the tense relationship between them. She will probably try to win Azadin over to her side, since they are relatives. The elders, in turn, will try to use this. Mediums suggested that the elders might try to make Azadin a spy within the ranks of Ariel, to which Ismail agreed. She realized what was troubling Ismail. In order to infiltrate Ariel, Azadin would most likely abandon his followers. Therefore, they may be sacrificed in the process. But Medium assured that she will not allow this. Ismail looked at her in surprise, but these were just words, and Ismail remained calm. Morning came, and the sun was rising from behind the mountains. Eldest, stretching, regretted that she had not slept at least a little. The sun was now rising. Azadin stood behind her and asked how she was feeling, suggesting that she rest. Eldest replied that everything was fine, so it was worth it to chat with him all night, but it was time for her to go. She was heading to Bruma to meet Arl. Eldest warned that the elders might demand that Azadin kill Ariel to prove his innocence. And she asked if he could do it. Azadin replied that he would do it if Eldest wished it. Aldous admitted that the conflict was breaking her heart, and therefore hoped that Azadin would try his best to avoid such a denouement. However, if Ariel attacks first, he will be ready for it. Eldest took Azadin by the hand and assured him that everything would be fine, and that Ariel would not take such a step. Azadin was silent, and then said that he had found 2 pages from the Divine King's book. Aldous was surprised that this was already a lot. He offered to take the pages for her safekeeping so that they would be safe. Aldous refused, saying that the pages should remain with him. Aldous promised that she would try to convince her people, but some of them can still harm him. So just in case, it's better to have the pages with him, although it's inconvenient to carry them around. Eldest used her magic and gave Azadin the bracelet, saying that it would help keep the pages of the book safe and hidden from the cultists. Azadin looked closely at the bracelet on his hand. Eldest said goodbye, expressing hope to see each other again at the summer solstice festival. Azadin replied that it would be a must if the festival took place. The first rays of the sun illuminated the city. Carriages and horsemen moved slowly along the streets. Medium, sitting in the carriage, noted that they had finally arrived in Salazam. All around one could hear the cries of the hungry and requests for alms. Azadin noted that there were so many refugees that if someone went missing, no one would notice. Ismail reminded about the missing people and the investigation, but Azadin was skeptical about the regional leader's words. In his opinion, there is a reason for such things. He is the herald, who is responsible for the region. But it seems that no one is in a hurry to interfere. Medium tried to lighten the mood by reminding them that at least they had been provided with a cart. Azadin asked how far it was to Torga's mother's estate. The bastard replied that he only had to climb the hill, and it was a stone's throw from there. At this time, Azadin heard that the era of Jupiter was approaching. There was a man standing outside shouting that when Peter entered the ecliptic, the demon gods trapped beneath Nedstrom would awaken and cause the end of the world. He called on people to repent, turn to the 3 benefactors, and help the poor. Medium, observing him, noted that he was simply a pathetic man projecting his misfortunes onto the entire world, wishing to burn with it. Azadin was surprised by her harshness, noting that everyone sometimes makes mistakes, and without forgiving people's weaknesses, one cannot move forward. Medium asked Azadin if he himself could forgive Ariel. Azadin fell silent, thinking about his words. He noted that all people are imperfect, so hatred towards one person is understandable and forgivable. This opinion turned out to be the opposite of what he had previously expressed, Ismail noted. Mom heard screams at the castle. The bastard was already riding up to the gates with knights. Medium, Ismail, and Azadin looked around warily. Ismail reported that all the passages to the estate were blocked. The bastard approached the guards and began to explain something. He said his mother was missing and was overcome with terror. Azadin suggested that they go inside to see for themselves what was happening. The gate opened and the group entered. Azadin ordered Medium and Ismail to search the first floor, and he himself headed upstairs. The bastard called for his mother, but no one answered. Azadin found a strange object on the floor. He picked it up and, after examining it closely, recognized the fur of a were-rat. The bastard was scared. Azadin confirmed that the house had been visited by the misery cult servants and their rat king.